Welcome to Haunting Whispers. Tonight, as the rain falls softly, we'll share some true scary stories to help you relax and fall asleep. And comment, where are you watching from and the time you are watching this video. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. I know what happens when you die. I was 4 when I first saw it. I lived in a fairly safe and comfortable neighborhood. We never wanted for anything, and I was an only child. I had 2 loving parents. By all accounts, there was no real inciting incident, no trauma, no fear, no nothing that would make me hallucinate. I was by all accounts a gifted child who lived with great, loving parents in a large house. I remember I had come home from school, I had gotten a snack from the pantry, and I was taking over the living room to watch Power Rangers, as was my after-school tradition. As I walked into the living room, I looked out into the backyard. At the time, my little brain could only register a furry lump. A squirrel. It hadn't been torn apart or killed by anything, just died of old age. I knew death was a thing, but I had never seen it in real life up to this point. This was the first time it occurred. From the corpse of the squirrel, I saw what looked like stringy teethers break loose from its body. Ethereal blue things, barely thicker than twine, pulling apart as I saw a ghostly blue version of the squirrel emerge from its body. It regarded me for a moment as I watched it. Could it see me? Did the dead watch us? Then I saw it immediately scamper off. My family wasn't religious. I wasn't religious. We were Christian, sure, but we didn't exactly visit church every Sunday, nor did we avoid specific vices or espout virtues. Still, we believed in the basics. When you die, you go to heaven if you're a good person. Hell if you're a bad person, but at the time I called it heck. Seeing this, well, I didn't know what to do. How was a 4-year-old supposed to handle this? Instead of watching TV, I went to my mom in the office. She was busy on a computer, having a serious talk with someone I didn't know. And are you sure it's nothing serious? If you, I'll have to call you back. We'll pick this up soon. Sure, goodbye. She'd hang up the phone, turning in her chair to look at me. Yes, Danny? Mom, there's a squirrel in the backyard. I'm sure there is, honey. Is that all you wanted to say? Mom, I think it died. Her face twisted in a look of revulsion. All right, dear. Let me get Daddy to take care of it. She left the office. I could hear her calling, Jacob, baby, need you to do something for me. She didn't get it. I mean, how could she? What was there to understand? And I didn't exactly blurt out that I saw ghosts. I was 4. What was I supposed to say? So I hid it. I locked it away in my brain, and it was my little secret. In a way, it gave me catharsis. I wasn't having existential dread at the age of 4, but the unknown still scared me. To know that your soul lives on, well, it gave me some measure of peace, even as a child. My parents weren't exactly going to think I was telling the truth either, so why bring it up? Kid me knew grown-ups couldn't see stuff kids could, but it was all right. There was no rule book, but I picked up some things as I watched. Some minor rules. Creatures had to be big enough. A mouse seemed to be the cutoff. I didn't see ants or gnats appear. From death, it took about 40 seconds for something to break free. I didn't know what would happen if you were brought back after legal death, but I assumed your soul was dragged back to you. You didn't get to fly, but you could walk through walls like a ghost most of the time. That was about all I had gathered for about a few years. Things were good for those 2 years. I had my secret nobody else knew, and it gave me peace. I knew one of the great unknowns of humanity. Me, a kid. I felt like a genius. Then the greater truth was revealed. It was December 8th, at about 6:15 in the morning on a Sunday, that things went to hell. I had been dreaming peacefully when the scream woke me up. I bolted upright, almost too afraid to speak. My room was on the 2nd floor of the house, and my parents were down the hallway. If I screamed, I'd wake them up. I had nightmares before. Was that all it was? Just a bad dream and a sudden scream? When you're a child, your mind tricks you to justify things. It couldn't trick my eyes, however. Across the street from us was Jeffrey Raymond's. Mr. Raymond's was an old guy, not quite senile, but his best years were behind him. He was a kind man. I loved going to his house when we went trick-or-treating. He liked to boast he gave out full-sized candy bars. That made him my favorite neighbor. I got out of my bed to see where the scream had come from, as it had been outside my window and across the street. Was Mr. Raymond's in danger? I didn't know, but I had to look. Mr. Raymond's was entirely blue, just as I had seen other dead things before, but he wasn't acting like himself. He was panicked. He was in his pajamas, howling, screaming, running through walls. He had died, probably from old age, but this wasn't like the squirrels or rabbits I saw. No, he was screeching, sprinting, sometimes going through walls, sometimes hitting them. It's like his body wasn't solid enough. It scared me. I ran down the hall, heavy steps ignoring how early it was, as I'd enter my parents' room. I went to my dad's side of the bed. "Dad," I'd say. Dad, wake up, can you wake up?" He'd groggily groan, leaning over to look at the alarm clock. "Hey bud, it's really early. You okay? Nightmare?" he'd ask, sitting up from the bed. Mom wouldn't wake up, heavily sleeping. "I think something bad happened to Mr. Raymond's." Why so, buddy?" "Just a bad feeling." "Nightmare?" "No, can you go check on him?" Mr. Raymond's might be sleeping. You know he's an old guy, Dad told me." "Dad, please, can you, please?" His eyes said, "I'm not going to sleep until I do this, am I?" But his face said, "Anything for you, sport." He'd push himself up, getting his slippers on. All right, I'll go check on him." As Dad went down the stairs, I returned to my room. I'd watch from the second-story window, hearing him open and close the door. Dad waved at a passing jogger, exchanging a quick discussion before he'd walk across the road. All the while, Mr. Raymond's spirit continued to howl, flail, scream. I don't think it knew where it was or what was going on. Dad knocked on the door. Silence. Dad looked concerned for a moment. He knocked again. Silence. Now I think he knew something was wrong. He'd do a quick jog back across to our house, where I heard him in the kitchen, grabbing the phone and talking to someone. I hoped to see Mr. Raymond's spirit calm down, but he'd just keep screaming, keep running throughout his rooms and through his walls. There's a danger in nature when an animal gets wounded. It calls for help. Sometimes a kind human finds it and pulls it out of a trap. Other times, a fellow member of the species finds it and saves it. But most often, those cries attract a predator. And in this case, Mr. Raymond's spirit was a siren. I stayed glued to the window, watching the scene, my eyes switching between the actions in the physical world as an ambulance pulled up and spiritual world, Mr. Raymond's ghost tirelessly howling and scrambling around. I wasn't sure how to help him, so I was going to decide to go to bed. That's when I saw it. All this time, I had only seen blue spirits, human, animal, or otherwise. They'd fluctuate in tone and opacity, sure, but always blue. This was the first time I ever saw a red spirit. It scrambled on all fours, long and lanky. Its arms were too long, its legs not ending in feet, but in two sharp talons, one in the front, one in the back. I covered my mouth, watching what I think was its head bob. It had no eyes, a sort of heavy shell covering the top half of its head. It was beelining to the screaming Mr. Raymond. Paramedics were having a polite conversation as it barged through them, phasing like a ghost. One paramedic turned around, as if someone had tapped his shoulder, but he looked back to his friend. I saw a primal terror in Mr. Raymond's eyes. He knew this was a predator. He screamed, howling less like a man and more like an animal, before he'd charge into the house. The thing followed soon after. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it. Panicked screams, guttural cries, and then silence. Eerily quiet. Maybe Mr. Raymond's had got away. Maybe he went somewhere further into the afterlife. A child struggled to comprehend non-existence, and the universe was now asking a child to comprehend what came even further after. Nausea was going to overtake me before my dad went in my room, making me turn away from the window. "Hey kiddo, hey, Mr. Raymond's, listen, He seemed unsure of how to broach the subject, doubly so considering I somehow knew Mr. Raymond had died. "It's okay, Dad," I whispered. "I thought it was a nightmare, but..." "Bad dreams, I know. Hey, listen. Do you want some breakfast? Whatever you want?" "No, I'm not really hungry right now. But thanks, Dad. I love you lots." "Love you too, buddy." Dad closed the door, probably wanting to give me some peace while I processed this. There were things to process, to be sure, but I didn't want to speak on it. I turned back to the window, watching to see if the red thing had gone. It hadn't. The red thing now stood in the middle of the street, hands twitching. Hands that ended in knives, not fingers. And it was staring at me without eyes. I covered my mouth in horror. Kid logic said that safety for monsters was always under the blanket. That made sense to me, scrambling under it as I got away from the window. Maybe it hadn't noticed. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Did it want to get me next? Did it want to kill me? The blanket covered me, head to my knees as I hid. I didn't need to see it, I could hear it. The clicking and clacking of its knife fingers on the walls. The red glow as it moved inside my room. I was trapped under my blanket, quivering, and as it came into my room, it just sat there, knees to its chest, right across from me. Time seemed to slow. Did I sit under the blanket for a minute? 20? 2 hours? I don't know, but it wouldn't leave, sitting there watching me. I felt bile well in my throat. I wanted to throw up from panic and dread. Experimentally, and against the child's code of what kept you safe, I removed the blanket. The thing was easily 7 feet tall, maybe more, but its arm length had to be about 8 or more. The shell on its head was more of a carapace, fused to the top of its head like a helmet. Leathery, red skin, taut and tight, like leather stretched over muscle. The worst was the mouth. It had no lips, no jaws, no normal teeth. What instead I saw was a slowly rotating blender of a hole, sharp and jagged. It was uncanny to feel a stare with no eyes upon you. We locked gazes, or at least I think we did, as I trembled in bed. I think I had peed myself, quivering, watching it observe me. It looked back, seemingly unaware of the horror I was in. We were in a stalemate until one long, bony knife finger uncurled. I watched that knife etch into the wall of my room, not damaging the physical space, but doubtlessly marking my room in the spirit world. It read, "Can you see me?" I looked at the wall, then to it, then to the wall. I nodded. Its razor maw rotated, sharp and jagged teeth spinning. "Can you hear me?" it asked. Its voice guttural, like it came from a drainpipe clogged with muck. I nodded. Of all the words to come out of its mouth, I didn't expect what it said next. "Sorry, I didn't want to scare you." Sorry, a monster, made of knives and jagged pieces, was apologizing for scaring me. "Can you hear me?" I asked back. "Yes." We stared at each other for an uncomfortable amount of time. "How did you know I could see you?" "Your eyes. They're like a lighthouse. When you looked at me, I thought I was in a spotlight." "Did you hurt him?" I asked bluntly. "Did you hurt Mr. Raymond's?" "Was that his name?" it asked. "Yes, I did. I'm sorry. Things are different when you cross over." "But that doesn't make it right," I'd argue. It looked at me, seeming to finally parse that I was a child before it had tilted its head. "You will understand in time. What's your name? I shouldn't talk to strangers." "I don't want to be a stranger. You're the only voice I've heard since crossing over." It paused, as if trying to figure out how to communicate with a child. "Then what's your name?" "Strangers don't give out their names." "I don't have a name," it responded. I looked at him. It occurred to me, in some childish capacity, that not having a name was bad. I looked him over, quivering, ignoring the panic. He might look scary, but he was being too nice, too polite. Just because someone looked horrible didn't mean they couldn't be good. "Rocky," I'd say. "Your name is Rocky." "Why?" it asked, tilting its head. "Rocky's the Red Ranger. You're red, so you're Rocky." "What's the Red Ranger?" I stared at him, realizing he probably didn't know much of anything. As an adult, looking back, I realize how idiotic it all is. The juvenile desire to help, ignoring my own safety because I felt I was special. "Nothing bad ever happened to special people," spoke the childlike mind. "In fact, you can help him, and he won't hurt other people." Evil was a choice, and maybe, just maybe, I could make him something good. "Rocky, do you want to be my friend?" I asked, oblivious in my youth to how stupid this was, only focused on how I could help him. "But you have to promise that you'll be good." I would like that very much. Rocky would make no promise, only that he would like that. But as the night deepened, so did the darkness in her soul. The dying boy, I'm so fucked. If you've ever worked in a coffee shop, you know the regulars. And if you've worked at the Caldies in Clayton, you know Randy. You can't miss him. He walks in almost every morning at 8:45 a.m. sharp, orders a small black coffee and sits in the corner booth by the window. But it isn't technically Randy that gets people talking, it's what he brings with him. A puppet. Not some ventriloquist dummy or a kid's toy. This thing's seriously unsettling. Pale as hell with no face, no features at all, just a blank white head with a pair of limp cloth arms and legs. Randy holds it by the hand, drags it into the cafe, and sits it down across from him like they're having breakfast together. Sometimes he talks to it, whispering, like he's expecting it to talk back. Other times, he just stares out the window, his hand resting on the puppet's shoulder, like they were waiting for something or someone. At first, like most people, I laughed. How could you not? Grown man, late 40s, walking around Clayton with a faceless puppet, acting like it's his kid. Even the regulars, who were usually buried in their laptops or textbooks, couldn't help but look up and smirk. We baristas made our share of jokes too. I joined in too much, I'll be honest. I regret it. Sometimes we'd even ask Randy if his friend wanted a piece of pumpkin bread. He'd smile warmly and explain that his son already had breakfast. It basically became part of the daily routine, just like his order. Then Kara, who had been working at Caldi's for years, pulled me aside one morning. Kara wasn't the type to joke around, which is probably why her words caught my attention. "You should stop making fun of him," she said. "What do you mean?" I asked. Kara glanced over at Randy, who was sitting at his usual seat, staring out the window, his hand gently resting on the puppet's arm like always. "There's a story behind it, something dark," she said, her voice low. "That puppet, it's his son." I chuckled, thinking she was messing with me. "Yeah, we all say that," I said. "No," Kara interrupted, her eyes serious. "I mean his real son, the one who died." "What?" 6 years ago, Randy's son tragically drowned at a lake. Kid was 10. Jesus. 4 months later, the puppet was left on Randy's porch with a note explaining that it was his son, made by someone who cared. It only required true belief to live. "That's the dumbest," I started saying before being cut off. "Maybe it's like the whole cracker embodied Jesus thing the Catholics believe," Maurice said, another barista who had been eavesdropping. "Exactly," Kara said, "though it's a bit darker than that." "What?" I asked. "Part 2 of the story is that the spirit of whatever that thing is has to take lives to keep living for Randy. And when you see the puppet for who it really is, you know you're next. You're toast." "You die?" I said aloud. "That's what your toast means," she scoffed. "My sister told me she heard about a high schooler who died. She lost her vision, then hearing, then couldn't speak. A few days later, her heart stopped beating." "What the fuck?" Maurice nearly yelled. All 3 of us laughed. Then we returned to slinging lattes and cold brews. But the thing is, after that conversation with Kara, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. You know how sometimes you hear a story and it just sticks in your head, no matter how ridiculous it sounds? It's that old saying, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Well, that's what this was to me. Every time I saw Randy dragging that puppet into Caldi's, I felt this nagging sense of unease creep up my spine. Months passed. Almost every day he brought in that damn puppet. Occasionally, I'd find myself staring at it blankly, transfixed almost. Sometimes I thought I saw it moving, or it had moved already and was now staring at me. But I would always smile and laugh at Kara's stupid story. Though I did find myself changing, I would chat to Randy a little more when he came in to order. I tried to be nicer to him. The story about his real son made me feel terrible. At first, it was just making small talk about the weather. "The cool air is refreshing, isn't it?" I'd ask. "We enjoy it very much," he'd say back with a smile. I had never really acknowledged the puppet directly. It was a little too weird and unsettling for me, to be honest, until last week when something came over me and I slipped up. "What have you and your son been up to this weekend?" Randy beamed a huge smile. "Oh, we just finished a long walk in the park. It's stunning outside. Now we're here, of course. Drink a coffee, and then I'll think we'll take the scenic path back home." "Amazing," I said back to him. "Sounds like a top-notch day." "Then we'll go swimming later," he added. "Even lovelier," I said. Randy stared at me for a long while, as if he was studying me. The gaze was so deep and eerie that it made the hairs on my arms stand up. "You're a good boy, aren't you?" I didn't know how to respond. "Let me grab your coffee," I said with a feigned smile. I watched Randy the rest of the morning and noticed he couldn't stop smiling and talking to the puppet about random things. Things like what's for dinner that night, laughing about the movie they watched the night before, and their upcoming plans for the weekend. Sure, he kept repeating as he nodded along to whatever he believed the puppet was saying to him. "We could do that, sure." Then he left as usual, and I breathed a sigh of relief. But this morning, While I was making a pumpkin cold brew for a customer, I found myself looking and gazing out our big shop windows, out at the park across the street. When I saw it, the world went silent. In the distance, I could see Randy walking in the park, pointing at all of the tall trees, whose leaves are just beginning to change color, while grasping the hand of a young boy beside him. A real boy. My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe it. My heart pounded in my chest as something urged me towards the windows. I had to get closer. There was no way. I pressed my face against the cold glass, hands trembling as I tried to focus. But the more I squinted, the blurrier Randy and the boy became. I closed my eyes and rubbed them hard, telling myself it had to be a coincidence. When I reopened them, all I saw was blackness. I'm so fucked. But that was just the beginning. Our next story delves even deeper into the unknown. I work for a secret corporation cleaning up crime scenes. This is how I got the job. Series, I've always been jealous of people who wear their hearts on their sleeves. I've never been able to react in a normal way. If I'm suddenly frightened, I won't jump or scream. I still feel fear, but it looks like I don't. I've only heavily sobbed 2 times I can remember, and I've never had a bout of laughter that I couldn't stop. This strange, mild manner didn't affect how my family cared for me. However, I found most people were put off by my demeanor. It's caused me to turn away from customer-facing jobs. After drifting from one failed career to the next, I settled on a simple one. I would retrieve bodies, and on the side started to study to become a coroner. Believe it or not, where I live, you don't need to have any kind of medical training to cut open dead bodies. However, I still was determined to take classes to fulfill my role. There is a desperate lack of coroners. If I wanted, I could become one and learn on the job. I found myself blessed with a lack of a gag reflex. I drove with a partner who often needed a few minutes to compose himself on the more gruesome pickups. The last body we retrieved together upset him to the point he could barely look at it as we loaded it into the back. It was the body of a younger man riddled with quarter-sized holes. I learned that night people had a phobia of small holes bunched together. I didn't blame people for disliking such a thing. The sight of the body made the back of my neck itchy, but I could handle it. I said I would take in the body so my coworker could head home early. He took me up on my offer. There is a difference between a medical examiner and a mortician. We still worked out of a funeral home, simply because it was easier to split the costs of the expensive equipment between the 2 businesses. After the stretcher was out of the van, my partner left for the night. I easily wheeled the body to the elevator to head to the basement. The place was creepy after dark. There was never enough light downstairs. No matter how hard we tried, mold kept building up near the corners of the walls. I struggled to get the stretcher out of the elevator because one of the wheels got stuck. I made one last push, the motion almost causing the body to slip off. I silently apologized to the corpse, then pushed the bag back into place. I could have sworn I felt something move inside the bag. I rubbed my hands against my pants, knowing my mind was just playing tricks on me. I pushed open one of the double doors to get into the autopsy area. A lock on the doors broke a few weeks ago, making it so only one door opened. At one point, you could lock both doors from the inside of the room, but if you jiggled the handle enough, you could unlock the only working door. We hadn't gotten any oversized bodies come through, so we didn't bother spending the money to fix it. My boss already finished the previous body we brought in earlier that day. He was just signing the report when I wheeled the newcomer into the middle of the room. "Just you tonight, Rory?" my boss asked as he turned around. "I can get our client downstairs on my own. It's not a big deal, Mr. Flynn," I replied, not pausing in my task transferring the body to the steel table. "Victor?" he corrected. He has been trying to get me to call him by his first name since I started working there. Because he was older than me, it felt a bit disrespectful. I nodded, trying to break my habit. He came over and helped remove the bag. We silently worked together, getting the room prepped for our task. After looking over the body in a better light, I couldn't help but wonder what happened to him. He was found in the middle of the woods, with no ID and rags for clothing. Aside from the holes, there were no other signs of death. Each hole appeared to be so clean, I considered a human made the wounds with some sort of tool. But for what purpose? Figuring out the motive behind a crime wasn't our job. We just needed to figure out the cause of death. "Can I stay and watch on this one?" I asked as we were finishing organizing the side table of tools. "I think you're ready to make some cuts this time. You have a steady hand and have respect for the dead. It will be nice when you're able to assist with some of the troublesome paperwork," Victor said with a very small smile. I respected him a great deal. I wondered if it was because we were similar. His voice was soft, and he was never troubled by any kind of gruesome sight that came with the job. I've never seen him rattled, and yet he could still smile. We also had matching pale skin, black hair, and dark eyes. I bet some people assumed we were related. "I'm awful at paperwork. I think they might be all on you," I replied with a shrug. Which was the truth. I really hated doing reports. Darn it, at least I have an employee willing to sacrifice their Friday night for work. I didn't realize it was a Friday. No wonder my coworker wanted to get out of there so fast. I glanced over to watch my boss so carefully arrange the scalpels and tweezers in their proper places. It was like he'd done the same actions 1,000 times before. Even after working here for a while, I didn't know that much about him. "If we don't have any clients come in, do you want to do something next Friday?" I asked, fully aware of how unprofessional the request sounded. A confused expression came over his face. It was as if no one had ever asked him such a question before. "You're aware I'm old enough to be your father, right?" He said, a smile creeping back onto his face. I didn't mean it like that. Like, just to hang out, to get to know each other. I wanted to sound offended, but my voice stayed in the same monotone it always had been. "We can get to know each other here. However, most people find it difficult to bond as they remove organs. I think we can make it work. But I don't know why you would be interested, though," Victor said. At least he wasn't going to fire me or report me to HR. Did we even have an HR? "I think you need a friend," I gave an honest answer. People may think we were alike, but after working here, I knew Victor was different in some ways others may not notice. I couldn't emote the way I wanted. He kept his emotions hidden behind a calm and collected mask. I couldn't shake the feeling he didn't show just how lonely he felt to anyone. I often found myself watching him for an extra second or two through the basement door windows. His expression was much different when he thought he was alone. I've seen his hand go to take off a ring that wasn't there before, washing his hands out of habit, along with so many other hints that he didn't have anyone in his life. I wasn't expecting him to accept my offer of friendship so we could keep things professional, but I wanted him to know the offer would always be there. A sound made us turn around. When you work in a morgue, you don't expect to hear anything aside from the hum of the fridge. What we saw didn't register for a few seconds. I saw a stressed smile come over my boss's face. He was fully convinced this was a prank. The body I'd brought in sat up. The head slowly turned in our direction, the blank eyes landing on two shocked workers. My boss looked at me expecting I would fess up to a joke. For once, my expressions showed just enough horror to convince me I wasn't behind all of this. I didn't blame him for not thinking this was real. Bodies don't just sit up. Half-rotten ones with countless holes don't move. But whatever made a home inside that flesh does. The corpse reached an arm out, and squirming shapes came to the surface of random holes. I felt stomach acid hit the back of my throat, making me think I would throw up for the first time in my life for a reason beyond an illness. The small creatures that made their home inside the body crawled out just enough for us to see the worm-like body and a mouth filled with countless teeth. We both reacted far too late. My hand fell on a scalpel. I gripped it tight, but my mind was slow to react. The corpse suddenly launched itself off the table and onto the person next to me. I pried the monster off him far too late. Within those few seconds, it had ripped open my boss's collar to get to the skin underneath. The bite wasn't as bad as I feared, but I saw one of those worms trying to get into the wound. Victor sputtered in shock and raised a hand to his bleeding neck. I stabbed the scalpel deep into the corpse's temple. I tossed the body aside to go over to remove the worm trying to dig into warm flesh. I had just finished stomping the thing into the cold tile floor when the corpse came at us again, so it didn't follow zombie movie rules, which sucked. We were too cheap to buy rib shears and used garden shears instead. The weight of them was nice in my hands. I kept the attacking monster back long enough for Victor to stumble towards the door. I got the walking corpse behind the stretcher I used to wheel it in. I then pushed the stretcher against the wall, pinning the body for a few seconds. I then ran, grabbing hold of Victor's arm to try and drag him out of there. We didn't make it. I heard a god-awful cracking sound. By the time I looked, the head of the corpse had split open. A long, disgusting tube came from the neck. So many teeth shone in the dim light. I felt my body get pushed to the side when that long worm snapped outwards, lighting fast to clamp down on Victor's throat. His mouth fell open in a silent scream and his legs gave out from under him. I don't know if the creature was weakened or if we were just lucky. I pulled off the tube, mentally wincing at the large wound that was left behind. I saw more of those smaller worms wiggling around and infecting a new host. I got him to his feet, and we made it to the door before the tube attacked again. I was forced through the door, and suddenly it was closed behind me. I saw Victor's pale face through the window, a pained smile on his face. "Victor," I shouted at him as I pushed against the door with everything I had. He knew he was infected and didn't want to risk whatever we were facing to get out. He wanted me to get out safe, and barricading himself with the monster inside the room was the only way. The hell with that. He collapsed on the other side of the door as I got to work jiggling the handle to unlock it. I needed to act fast. The worm noticed my face behind the window. When I felt the door unlock, I held my breath and waited. The gruesome worm shot out again, crashing through the window. I ducked just in time and then charged into the room. First, I got down low to find a lighter in Victor's pockets. I knew he smoked but was trying to quit. I found the small object and then raced over to the desk on the other side of the room. The people working here got used to the smells of the job, but we often got cops or detectives who weren't. As a small mercy, we would spray some Lysol if we knew they were coming. I grabbed a can I knew was full. Then I faced the creature that was recovering from the failed attack. Normally, I was against people doing what I did. If you held the flame too close to the nozzle, the flames could go back inside the can and explode. Knowing that I kept the lighter far enough away to be a bit safer and created the outcome I wanted. Before the worm could shoot out again, I sprayed the main body with as many flames as I could. I heard wailing from the other infected creatures inside the body. The attack didn't last as long as I liked. The monster got out from behind the stretcher to stumble around screaming in pain. We also worked with a lot of flammable chemicals. I won't say what I poured on the screaming corpse as it was distracted, but it worked. With one more lighter flick, the thing burst into flames. I coughed as I dragged Victor out of the room. I blocked the door, keeping the now dying monster inside to burn. He didn't look good. He lost a lot of blood, and I got right to work, pulling out any worms I saw. The skin around his puncture wounds wriggled with the infection. I didn't know what to do. I would cause more damage by ripping those worms out. I risked nicking an artery because of where they were crawling around. Through the stress of the moment, I saw a thin chain around his neck with a worn wedding ring. For some reason, that sight was what made me refuse to lose him. I got as many worms as I could. Then I realized he'd stopped breathing. I needed to deal with that first. Thank God I recently redid my CPR course. I know most people wouldn't dare give mouth-to-mouth to someone he had just been infected with who knows what, but I wasn't thinking straight. I just wanted him to live. CPR is hard on the body. I didn't know if it had been a minute or an hour. Sweat already stunned my eyes as I silently begged him to breathe again. I went from begging to telling him to come back. I couldn't explain why I became so sure Victor would open his eyes again. It was like I told the universe that it wasn't his time, and it listened. I was scared as hell when the infected corpse sat up, and yet I wasn't scared for Victor. A sharp, hot pain came from my hands in the middle of compressions. It was as if an electrical current came from my chest to travel into his. After the feeling disappeared, Victor started to cough. His body jerked as his back arched. I grabbed a hold of his head and laced my fingers behind it to cushion his skull from slamming into the hard ground. I didn't force him to stay still, unsure if that would harm him more. I just didn't want him to smash his head open as he thrashed around. The bloody wound on his neck wriggled and, to my shock, slowly started to heal. When he finally fell still, the wound scarred over and his breathing returned to normal. I sat, covered in blood, with a horrible burnt smell overtaking the entire basement. I wasn't even aware a pair of men in suits came out of the elevator, one with a sword in hand. The other held a gun pointed downwards. I met their stares, feeling as shocked as they looked. The next few moments were a blur. One checked on the charred pile in the other room. He then borrowed the stretcher to place Victor on. I was separated from him to be led into a car waiting outside. I don't know how long we drove for. No one told me much. They just provided some water and rags to get cleaned up a little. The car stopped in front of a medical building I didn't recognize. I was brought into a clean white room and then told to hand over my clothing to be destroyed. I didn't put up a fight. At least I was given some privacy to shower and change into a clean set of white clothing. Then I was left alone for hours. The room had a bathroom, a hard bed, and a stack of paperback books. Nothing else. I sat alone trying to understand what happened. I had a million questions, but when another man dressed in a suit came into the room, I only asked one: "Is Victor all right?" I hated how calm I sounded. For once, I wanted to act as distressed as I felt. "So far, he'll be under observation," the man explained. He took out my wallet and phone that had been in my pockets when I gave up my clothing. At least I got those back. "Is everything all right? I mean, are there more infected corpses out there?" I pressed, slightly worried this was the start of the end of the world. He thankfully shook his head. "This was a mistake. It never should have happened, let alone you to be the one to pick up the body. Normally a company that deals with things of this nature are the ones on scene. I hate to say it, but this slipped through the cracks. As awful as it is, when accidents in this manner do happen, they get cleaned up quickly afterward." His suit looked perfect, along with his styled black hair. He looked like the ideal image of a secret agent. He hinted at the fact this sort of thing happened often enough for an entire company with agents to deal with it to exist. At that moment, I didn't care about the fact monsters were real. So, 2 people nearly dying counts as a quick cleanup? Is Victor just a mistake? Again, I hated just how calm my voice sounded. On the inside, my chest was hot from rage. The man's face dropped. He lost his tough agent mask, and I felt bad snapping at him. If it was up to him, there would be no mistakes. For some reason, they couldn't fully avoid others getting hurt. "You're right to be upset. We should have caught on to this before it reached you. We'll be providing Mr. Horford Flynn as much care as needed." I thanked him for that news, but I didn't apologize for my words. Since I was cleared to go, he led me outside to a waiting car. There were no threats to not tell others what happened, nor did he say what company he worked for. I got home that night with so many questions, but was too exhausted to think about them. I didn't go to work for 2 days. The cover-up story was there had been a gas leak. On the second day, an unknown number called. I answered it, hoping it was news about how my boss was doing. When they said he was doing well, I pressed to be able to go and see him. After a bit of back and forth, they agreed to send another car. The other medical building was 2 hours away. I didn't mind. I needed to sign in, and somehow it didn't feel like a top-secret government building. The same agent as the other night met me at the door. He filled me in a little as we made our way down to Victor's room. "Seeing him may be hard on you. He won't be the same as before. Normally the infection takes over the body so it can multiply inside. For some reason the worms fused with his body, creating, well, something we've never seen before. His brain was affected. He doesn't seem to remember much. The doctors thought it would be good to have a familiar face with him, however." The agent stopped speaking. We stood outside the room, and yet he didn't open the door just yet. My stomach turned, waiting for the rest of the conversation. "We cannot guarantee your safety. He may lash out searching for food," he warned. I nodded my head. I was a bit scared of what I was going to see inside that room. I refused to let myself give in to that fear. When the agent knew I was fully aware of the risk, he opened the door to let me inside. Victor looked awful. His face was pale with bags under his eyes. His black hair was limp and unbrushed. He had a small tray on his bed with some small squares of colored paper. A few crumpled balls on the floor showed how he failed to fold the paper into whatever he wanted to make. I slowly walked over, pausing a few steps away. "Do you know who I am?" I asked softly. He raised his head, eyes blank with zero recognition on his face. The oversized white sweater made him seem even paler, his new scars on full display. When I took a step closer, a deep growl came from him. I moved slightly closer, and he pulled back his lips to show off a mouth full of sharp teeth. I noticed the agent in the open doorway, still and yet ready to act. I sat on the chair beside his bed, ignoring the threatening display. "I don't know how to fold a crane either. Let's learn how together. I think you need a friend," I said as I reached over to the paper with the folding instructions. I expected him to snap at my hand, being so close. The growling died down, and a human expression came back to his face. He watched as I picked up a colored paper to get started with. The one in his hand was wrinkled. "Let's use a fresh piece. What color do you want?" I asked as I took the pile to flip through the colors. "Red?" His voice was low and hoarse, but at least he was talking. I stayed with him for over an hour, learning how to fold. I think it was good for him. By the time I was told to leave, we had 2 badly finished cranes on his bedside table. I promised I would be back whenever I was able. It felt wrong to leave him behind. He shouldn't be in this state. None of this should have happened. I couldn't sit still. I knew the gas leak story was a lie. After getting home from seeing Victor, I headed over to the funeral home. I don't know what I was looking for. The back door was locked, but I knew the code. The smell of burnt flesh still hung in the air. It got stronger as the elevator descended to the basement. I stepped into the room, seeing they hadn't cleaned up the bloodstains on the floor. The body had been removed. That was all. Everything was a mess from the struggle. I was told someone would be by to clean because the company already collected everything they needed. But they didn't know when they could send the cleaning service. I gathered up what I needed to get to work. I don't know why I felt I needed to be the one to scrub the blood off the floor. Since the funeral home was closed, I never expected someone to come down into the basement. I didn't even hear them. When a person cleared their throat behind me, my body tensed up. My hand squeezed the sponge so hard it hurt. I half expected to see another dead body up and walking around. That would have been more believable compared to who I saw. A very short man looked down at me. I didn't recognize him and thought it was strange he was wearing pieces of a costume. When he took a step to better see what I was doing, I realized his tall rabbit ears and feet were real. "I am Lupa, the office supervisor for the corporation. I wanted to meet with you personally to apologize for what happened, but you were not at home," he said. His deep voice did not match his appearance. He wore a professional brown vest over a button-up shirt. His dress pants stopped at the knees to let his rabbit legs move freely. He even had a tail that I very much wanted to touch. I didn't let my expression show my intentions. "I think Victor is the one you should apologize to," I replied, standing up to address him. "Yes, you're correct. Tragic that he was harmed. Unfortunately, we do not have enough manpower at our disposal to ensure such a thing never happens again. You can imagine how hard it is to come by people who not only know about supernatural threats, but can deal with them. We're lacking in manpower in each department, as you can see. Not even enough cleaners to go around," he said while giving a dirty look to the soapy, bloody water on the floor. I didn't like his tone. He spoke as if implying he wanted to say something else, like crime scene cleaners. But for supernatural crime scenes, there are people for that? I asked. "Some. Not enough," he shrugged. "A shame, because we do pay so well." I knew he didn't come here to apologize. I didn't know why he didn't just come out and say his reasoning for dropping by. But how did he know I was here to clean up the place? Did he want to offer me any kind of job, but didn't care what I did? Were they desperate for people they were willing to let me do any kind of job for them? "So you're saying there are a few job openings. I'm currently out of work right now. My boss is in the hospital. Do I need to submit a resume?" Lupa smiled at my words. For a cute rabbit man, he really creeped me out. There was something dark hidden behind his expression. No need for such a thing. We already know everything about you. I'll send over the information for you to approve of. I warn you, this job can have some dangers. Of course, we compensate well because of that. Any job that deals with cleaning up blood or other body fluids is a hazard, not to mention the mental toll of seeing the outcome of what happens to a body in these scenes. Instead of dealing with just normal murders or bodies rotting alone, I would see the aftermath of a supernatural attack. This wasn't a job for any sane or rational person. All right, I'll finish up cleaning this and then I can look over the job information. I nodded. Another somewhat sinister smile came from Lupa. He thanked me and then headed on his way. I really shouldn't be sticking my nose into danger. I got lucky getting out alive after an encounter with one monster. But I was only cleaning up messes. How dangerous could it be? A job is a job, no matter how frightening or life-threatening it may be. At least, I somewhere knew what I was getting into. As I cleaned for hours that night, I wasn't aware of what nightmares waited for me from accepting this job offer. I worked for a secret corporation cleaning up crime scenes. The Hoarder House, Part 2. Getting the new job was quick. I hadn't fully recovered from what happened to Victor when an email arrived. I expected something horrifying or dark. Instead, I was asked to clean up a hoarder's house after they passed away. The pay was more than I made in 3 months. But since the attack in the morgue, I learned a few things. The place Victor was recovering in cost a lot of money. The company I would be working for covered some of the costs. The rest would be on him or his family. From what I could tell, he didn't have any family left. I asked what would happen to him if no one paid. It was implied he would work off his debt once he was able. That meant working for the corporation that fought against supernatural threats. They had failed to pick up on the infected body that ruined his life. I doubted he would last long in that type of job. And would they really let him work when he was ready? Or would they force him? I didn't put it past Lupa to have set all this up. I could refuse this new job, but I would never be able to live with myself afterward. I accepted the offer, and the following day someone arrived to get me to the location of the cleanup. In such a short amount of time, I've learned that supernatural things were real. I've seen a rabbit man, an infected zombie, and my boss gets turned into something no longer human. When I was told that the corporation I now worked for could magically make one door lead to another, I accepted it. I permitted them to use my front door. I opened it to find myself crawling out of a car instead of stepping out of my home. It was a jarring experience, to say the least. A man waited for me outside the house I was called in to clean. He had some gear, but it didn't appear he would be staying. His skin was dark, and a set of yellow eyes behind huge glasses gave away the fact that he wasn't fully human. Even though it was unseasonably warm out, he dressed in layers of baggy clothing. His black curly hair was tied into a messy bun. Honestly, he was cute in a nerdy sort of way. "I'm Samus. I'm here to give you some information about this job. It's simple, but it will be time-consuming," he explained in a soft voice. He showed me what looked like a hazmat suit. The white full-body suit had a plastic face cover with a respirator. This house must be awful if I needed to get up like this. He then directed my attention to a large metal storage shipping container that had been converted into a dumpster sitting in the backyard. "We have the suit for you to wear, so you don't bring home any bugs or breath in the rot of the house. There is no time limit on this job. All the cleaning supplies have been provided. You'll be able to call us if you require more. The neatest thing about this job is the dumpster. Here, let me show you how it works." Samus handed me a bag of trash that had been sitting by the back door. He wanted me to toss it into the large bin, but also for me to watch what happened after I did so. The issue is I was too short. He paused to think for a moment. Then a grand idea occurred to him. With some awkwardness, I got on his shoulders to see into the dumpster as I dropped the bag. The trash bag sank into the metal bottom as if it were water. That was weird. Really weird. After I got down, he explained what I had just seen. Any non-living thing that is thrown inside is transported to a sorting facility. If we can recycle it, we'll do so. Anything beyond salvage is burned. The corporation recently designed a furnace that produces magic. It helps create a source of energy to power weapons instead of draining creatures. Oh, and if there's anything you would like to keep, you're free too. Just place it inside the clear bags, send it through the dumpster, and we'll clean it for you. Samus said, sounding excited over the special dumpster. What if I toss a mouse or something like that by mistake? I assume anything alive wouldn't get sent through, but would they just get trapped inside and starve to death? I asked. To answer my question, Samus went over and undid a latch that opened the heavy metal door of the dumpster to clearly shoo off the inside. If you toss in anything alive larger than a bug, you can just let them out this way, he suggested. Why did I sit on your shoulders? I remarked in a deadpan voice. Samus froze, realizing his mistake. He brushed it off like a champ to help me put on the suit. This was an odd job for a supernatural company to ask me to do. Did the house owner die in a monster attack? Or was there another reason? I asked Samus, and he nodded with his arms crossed. There is one clean room on the top floor. It's locked, so don't try going inside. It looks like the son of the woman who lived here attempted some sort of ritual. We're unsure if it worked or what he was even trying to do. The son is missing, but his mother appears to die of natural causes. Her body was mummified by the time anyone found her. We removed the body, so don't worry about that. If you find anything you may fear to be supernatural, stop what you're doing, leave the house, and call for backup. Well, none of that was comforting. I waited until Samus finished speaking before I put the hood of the suit on and got the respirator working. I dreaded walking inside the house, but my face didn't show it. Samus checked the time to see if he had been there for too long. It's nice having someone to help clean up scenes like this. Our workers keep getting eaten, but I think you'll do fine, so good luck. My stomach turned at his words. He did a cheery wave, and I returned it. After he left, I really didn't want to go inside. But this was my job now. I better get it over with. I grabbed a box of garbage bags and then went inside through the back door. The door was blocked with so much trash, I barely had enough room to squeeze inside. Thank God for the respirator and my lack of a time limit on this job. I knew this would take me forever to finish. There was a small back hallway that led into the house. Piles of moldy boxes lined each wall. Shoes and empty grocery bags were stacked on the very top of the boxes. Some piles reached the ceiling. I first cleared up the stacks blocking the door. After I could open it all the way, I started taking down boxes. Most were full of old newspapers, expired food, and rags. It was easier to carry the boxes to the dumpster 2 at a time and toss them inside than dumping everything into bags. I didn't keep track of time. I was sweating in my suit but didn't dare take it off. All sorts of bugs came out of hiding as I moved trash around. I almost felt bad for them for taking away their home. Since I wasn't sorting through the trash, the process was faster than I expected. I had cleared out the small hallway. Stained floors that hadn't seen the light of day in years looked almost out of place in the rest of the house. I decided not to scrub them clean until I cleared out the rest of the house. I would just be tracking my dirty boots through the hallway to get to the dumpster. No point in breaking out the cleaning supplies just yet. I moved into the kitchen to see years of neglected plants, takeout containers, and more boxes. The stove had been caked in so much grime, it would be better to toss the entire thing. I hated to see what the inside of the fridge looked like. I couldn't believe a person lived here at some point. Aside from some packed down footpaths in the dirt, there had been no signs of human life within the trash. I took countless trips to the dumpster. It felt somewhat satisfying tossing the boxes and bags over the top. At least all this waste would be put to some kind of use. It looked like the sun was going to set soon. I wanted a break, but decided to wait until I couldn't see what I was doing, then pack it in for the night. I just needed to call someone to get me back home. It didn't appear I made a lot of progress despite how many trips I made from the house. Near the end of the day, I paused to stretch out my sore back. I found my mind wandering. How could someone live like this? Surely, they somewhat noticed how bad things were getting around them. Wasn't the owner getting sick from all the mold and insects taking over the house? I knew hoarders had a problem that made it impossible for them to throw away anything. I stared at the pile of disgusting pots and pans long forgotten on the stove, trying to think of a reason why someone may think of keeping them. Maybe they thought if they just cleaned the pots, they were still good. And things just got out of hand. Just cleaning one thing meant cleaning the sinks, the floors, and everything else. A set of stained pots meant something to this person. They were just trash now that the owner was gone. Didn't that apply to most things? People cared about things others might not. A psalm holds meaning when it may not be anything special to a different person. The only difference between myself and the women who owned this house was that I kept my clutter in my heart. The sun had gone down since I stopped to think. The house still had power, but the lights were so grimy, it wasn't worth trying to work in the dark. I was about to pack up and leave when I heard something from inside the house. A bump just beyond the room. I am still inside. I hadn't seen any signs the owner of the house had any pets at some point. Did an animal get inside, and I just hadn't seen it yet? I strained to hear over my breathing. Carefully, I made my way through the knee-deep trash to the cupboard counter. The drawer squeaked open as I rooted around for some sort of weapon. Luckily, I found a large knife I gripped in a gloved hand. I thought I was ready for anything. My heart raced in fear, imagining anything from a wild raccoon to a man-eating monster. I wasn't expecting a person to come stumbling through the pathway. I clutched the knife as fear got stuck in my throat. I had flashbacks to the attack in the morgue. This person wasn't alive. I could tell right away. Their dried skin clung to bones, and torn clothing hung from a thin frame. I still knew they could hurt me. I started to move, but that caught the attention of the creature. He raised his head, eyes empty aside from a glowing red light. His lips were missing, causing his teeth to show in a forever gruesome expression. I moved faster as the monster screamed in a way that made my entire body tense. Within a second, the hands were on mine. He tore at my suit with clawed hands. I stabbed the knife deep into his chest, the blade getting stuck just above his collarbone. It didn't even slow him down. The clawed hands tore into my skin through the layers I wore. I held back a scream of pain as I raised one leg. I have an older cousin, and when we were growing up together, he liked to bully me with forced wrestling matches. I've found that my legs are stronger than my arms. I lifted a foot to place it on the creature's stomach. With a hard push, I got it off me. I then took hold of a stack of boxes I hadn't gotten to yet and pulled them down. The mess buried the monster, but only for a moment. I started to run, but a hand shot out to grab my ankle. That time, I did let out a small scream. The plastic face shield started to fog up in my panic. I crashed down to the ground, the hand still wrapped tightly around my ankle. I started to blindly kick, trying to free myself. I must have kicked the monster in the face. I felt something crack under my foot as the hand released its grasp. I got upright and ran for my life out of there. I slipped, falling into boxes and more trash. I needed to worry about an infection or bugs getting into my torn suit later. I made it outside, only to realize a horrifying thought. My cell phone was in my pocket under the suit. My shaking hands tried to get the damn back zipper open. I didn't even find the end of the zipper when the creature came out of the house. The red eyes landed on me. It let out another horrible scream. I bent down and took hold of a scrap bike frame that had been left out to rust. I tossed it at the monster, hitting it across the face. It bought me some time to do something I wasn't certain would work. I pulled open the door of the dumpster enough to slip inside. The creature was hot on my heels. I got knocked down again. My back was pressed against the hard metal bottom of the container. The monster pinned me down. The teeth clashed against my plastic face shield. I was glad I kept it on. The claws tore at my clothing, leaving deep cuts along my shoulders and forearms. I was scared. So scared I almost forgot my plan. I got my feet up to kick the monster again. It rolled along the floor, growling and spitting. I couldn't afford to waste time. I rushed over to pin my knee into its rotten back. I heard something crack as the creature hissed. Then the body started to sink. I pushed as hard as possible, forcing it through to the other side like all the trash that day. I didn't think about whoever may need to deal with the thing on the other end. All I knew was that I would have died if I didn't do this. When the creature fully disappeared, I sat in shock. My body hurt and my head swam. When I was able, I got up to stumble out of the dumpster. I tossed off my hood and plastic scratched-up face shield. I considered calling someone about what just happened, but didn't think I was calm enough to do so. When I heard my name, I thought my heart might stop. I looked over to see a man I didn't recognize. "You're Rory, correct? How badly were you hurt?" He pressed as soon as he stopped in front of me. He was tall with brown hair and deep dark eyes. He wore a suit, and it took me a few seconds to realize we worked for the same company. Unless that thing was carrying some sort of disease, not much, I think. I didn't even know how much I'd been beaten up. I was still standing, so I figured I was fine. His jaw tightened, and I took a step back. He looked angry. At first, I thought it was because of what I just did. "You could have died. You're human, and yet they sent you into a place before anyone fully cleared it. Lupa always does this. He sees humans as bait," he said, upset over my working arrangement. I understood why he was so upset. I assumed people who could deal with supernatural threats were in high demand. Why use up their time when you could just toss a disposable human at the problem? I knew some risks came with this job, and yet it was still odd to hear how little my life meant to my new boss. Samus showed up next, looking as worried as the agent. "I'll take her to the clinic to get looked at. Toph, if you have time, can you look through the house?" Samus asked, as he had already started to guide me away. "Is everyone at the sorting facility all right? I did just send a monster their way." I questioned. "Oh, don't worry about that. They already took care of it. In fact, the creature is a good study resource. It's being moved by pure magic. We might learn something about it. But besides that, let's get you taken care of," Samus said in a calm voice. He didn't look calm. He was scared of what condition he might have found me in before he arrived. The agent started towards the house, his hand at his side, as if he had a hidden weapon ready to be drawn. I should ask for a gun or something for the next job. Okay, maybe not a gun. I was a terrible shot. I doubted I was seen as valuable enough to be given a magic weapon. I could dream, though. I was swiftly taken away to a small clinic, where a black-haired doctor with half-moon glasses looked me over. I was given some scrubs to change into, so they could trash my clothing. I knew I would be tossing a lot of my clothes in this line of work, so made sure to wear things I wasn't attached to. I hurt, but at least they cleared me of any signs of infection. I wasn't going to be turned into a monster from a few scratches. In an hour, I had my wounds wrapped up, and I was cleared to go home. Samus promised me that the house would be looked over before I was able to go inside again. The agent who arrived on the scene had a few hours between jobs. He ensured there weren't any more monsters ready to eat me. It was a weird feeling to have someone use their precious spare time on me. At least I was making friends at this new job. The next day, I still felt a little sore. I called to see if I could visit Victor for a few hours. I was refused. One of his caretakers told me Victor wasn't in the best mental state that day. I offered to cheer him up, but they couldn't guarantee my safety. He told me that Victor had tried to fold a worker like a paper crane. I decided to wait a day or so until I saw him again. I called asking if I could finish cleaning the hoarder's house. I didn't have anything else to do that day. Samus met me in the backyard again with a new hazmat suit. He also handed over what looked to be a fancy metal pen. I liked pens. I couldn't help but steal any I come across, even though I barely used them. I asked to have this made. It's not much. If you hold down the clip, it turns into a blade, Samus explained. I looked over the silver pen and did what he told me to. I pressed down to see a blade spring out from the end. In the blink of an eye, the pen turned into a 6-inch weapon. I pressed the clip again to turn it back. Pen, sword, pen, sword. Samus said nothing as he watched me click between the two a few times. I shook my head out of my daze to thank him. If you hold down the clip while the blade is inserted into something, a small blast of magic will come out. Maybe not enough to kill. It should give you time to get away from the threat, though. He offered. I do appreciate having something sharp, but it doesn't seem like much, I said as I wiggled it between my fingers. Can I get something bigger? He shrugged, looking towards the house. Until we can get you into training, a gun would be useless. Right now, you're being sent to places with the lowest risk of getting killed by a supernatural threat. Lupa doesn't want to spare the resources on giving you a powerful weapon you may not use when it could be in the hands of someone who would. It didn't seem like most people who worked for Lupa enjoyed his company very much. His reasoning was logical, if not a bit too heartless for most people to accept. What was that monster anyway? I asked, so I didn't make Samus Bad talk his boss more. That was the sun, it seems. He tried to perform a spell to make him immortal. That was the result. We think he drained his mother's energy. Most likely he stayed dormant in the trash, so that's why none of the previous agents sensed a creature there. We'll try not to let this sort of thing happen again. You'll try, I repeated to make a point. Samus gave a slightly pained smile. I wondered how many agents died because most of them could do nothing but try. If this was one of the less risky jobs, I hate to know what the more dangerous ones were. Can you thank the agent who came by for me? I requested as I started to get ready to finish the job. I gave him your number. Toph is overprotective of the newer workers. If he has the time, he'll help. Samus kept looking at the time as he spoke. After he helped me into the suit again, he needed to go back to his real job. After he left, I let myself think about just how pressed for resources and workers the corporation was. A chill ran down my spine at the thought of just how many monsters were out there that pushed the company to its limits. I figured they could cover up the attacks with magic and money. After all, what happened at the morgue was covered up so perfectly that it scared me. I dreaded what would have happened to me if I hadn't taken this job. But I did, and that meant facing monsters and the gruesome aftermath of their crimes. If I didn't, Victor would be forced into a life of fighting. I refused for that to happen. I knew people would assume I had a crush on him or something. I didn't. I wanted to be his friend. Even if we couldn't understand each other after what happened, he didn't have anyone else. He became my responsibility because of the lack of other options. Oddly enough, I was fine with that. I braced myself, then walked back into the house. It took me 3 days of tossing out trash and scrubbing to have the place looking livable again. Whoever got the house next would need to replace a lot of the floors. It might be cheaper to tear the house down and rebuild it. The locked room had been opened, but I didn't need to clean it. The corporation had replaced the floors, repainted the walls, and erased any signs of what happened in that room. It made me feel uncomfortable. I kept the door locked the entire time I cleaned. With that job done, I had enough money to keep Victor taken care of for a month. If I was lucky, I only needed to do a handful of these gigs per year. I doubted my luck holding. After I finished cleaning the hoarder house, I was already requesting another assignment. My scratches and small wounds hadn't healed yet, but I needed to keep working. It wasn't my life on the line. My first job made that fact very, very clear. As one nightmare ends, another begins. Let's turn to a tale even more chilling. There's something out there slaughtering the livestock. Dear Ma, I want to preface this by saying I love you, and it may be a while before I see you again. Janie and I celebrated 8 years together as of a few months ago, and Charles just turned 2 this fall. We held a small function with some of the other families in town. Albury has a small population, around about 200 people. Regardless, Charles was spoiled rotten. Many wooden toys was thrown his way, and he cherished them all. It would appear that the town had a heart of gold. Nothing makes you feel more proud than when you can see your baby boy smile like I did. And the day of the function was the happiest I'd ever seen Janie in the last 5 years. After Matthew's untimely passing, I thought I'd never see her smile again. Honestly, I thought our marriage wouldn't survive it. Janie and I's new property has been serving us well. The acreage is perfectly sized, and harvests have been plentiful. I'd recently built up a shed for all my tools, and a smaller, makeshift cubby for Charles to play in. Sometimes I'd catch him copying me, whether it be hammering some nails or sawing some timber. He'd often ask through a series of assertive grunts if he could use a real tool. He hasn't spoken yet, but if I was a betting man, I'd reckon Daddy would be the first thing out his mouth. Things have been looking up the last few months, but truth be told, we've been having issues with livestock. Over the last few weeks, I'd noticed some of our cattle had gone missing. At first, I thought some lowlife had been sneaking in at night and stealing them from right under our noses. Then I found the bodies. I'd taken the horse out by the river, which runs straight out to a large inlet. It's situated about 20 acres out from our house, just down on the south end. Sprawled up along the riverbank were about 6 of our 9 bovines. Now, you'd assume these animals had gone stupider, if that were even possible, and drowned themselves, either intentionally or not. But they had been killed, massacred. They had been freshly killed, within days of disappearing. Their innards, either missing or washed up on the other side of the bank. Some of the cattle were even missing limbs. Their heads were viciously torn from shoulders, and their legs jagged and crooked. I don't mean to upset you with the details, but I find it necessary to include them. Now, obviously, we've got a gator problem. Countless times I'd seen gators pulling in small game through the river, and sometimes even coming out to chase. But I'd never seen a mass grave of this proportion, this quickly. Janie and I suffered economically for this, and we'd needed to replace those animals that died over time. I spent a couple of days building a makeshift fence to prevent future incidents. Some of the local gentlemen even offered to help out for free. I insisted we paid them somehow, and they agreed that something to satisfy their hunger would do just fine. Like I said, a heart of gold. The problem, for the time being, was solved. We replaced those dead, and soon we were back in the swing of things. Charles was happy, healthy, and I found myself fairly comfortable in our lodgings. Tonight, things changed. First thing I heard was the groaning. A very shrill, painful moan was echoing its way from the pasture, and I feared the worst. A sick cow, a dying cow. I thought, potentially, our cattle had been caught with a plague. Maybe that's what killed them in the first place. I told Janie I'd head out, just check on them, make sure it was nothing. She sat on her chair, quietly reading to herself. Charles lay on his stomach by the fireplace. I looked at him and gave him a comical, "Listen to me, Charles. You're in charge while I'm gone." Then Janie laughed and scooped him up, saying, "So you're the man of the house now, huh?" As I left, Charles's infectious laughter was the last thing I heard before the wooden door shut. I retrieved Delilah from the stable and equipped her with a rifle, just in case. I wouldn't say I'm a gunslinger, but I don't miss either. It was a few minutes of trotting along, following the pained moans. When I saw it, I flashed the lantern down to the grass. Our oldest and longest living cow was now horizontal, her eyes large and black, hopeless. Her stomach was split open, a large gash stretched from her sternum to her udder. An assortment of organs were spilling out from within. She shouldn't be alive, and yet she was, and she was suffering. Although I hate doing it, I know it's necessary. I jumped off Delilah, armed myself with the rifle, checked it was loaded, and fired one round, putting old Betsy out of her misery. The loud bang sent waves through the brush, and birds that were once sleeping now fled the trees and scattered the night sky. The moaning had ceased. The wings of those birds then diminished, and it was quiet once again. Now, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy, but I want to remind you beforehand that everything I'm about to write is true. It happened, and I now know what killed them. I stood over the body of my dear Betsy, and I slipped the rifle back into Delilah's saddle. As I faced away from the body, I was peeking just over Delilah's neck. On the edge of the tree line were a pair of golden dots, luminescent dots that seemed to slowly sway left and right. I couldn't make out exactly what it was, the lantern's glow blocking a clear visual that far in front of me. I hesitated for a moment and watched these eyes move ever so slightly. Then they were gone, and for a moment, I felt a sense of imminent whack-a force so great had set me flailing across the field. Delilah's body followed close behind me. It felt like a train had barreled through and struck my very soul. I crumpled in a heap in the lengthy grass and took a moment to get my bearings. I had been terribly winded. The sheer weight of whatever had hit me had sent me at least 12 yards away. I rubbed a hand across my abdomen and knew I had broken a couple of ribs, coughing up blood in the process. It took me a second, for I feared my lungs may have been punctured, but I managed to get a sharp inhale the same moment I sat up on my buttocks. I steadied my breath and looked up to see Delilah, also flat on the earth. The lantern had cracked, sending a devastating ember to the land. A steady fire began to spread, and it danced its way between us. Delilah laid there. But she, unlike myself, was unmoving, and she, unlike myself, was being cradled by a tall, ungodly being. One with eyes I could only describe as unwavering, thoughtless, empty, with a presence so terrifying it sent Lucifer into hiding. Long, sharp claws protrude from its bony hands. One collection of claws wrapped themselves tightly around Delilah's throat, and the other rested just over her stomach. The creature's face was an amalgamation of all of your worst nightmares, both insectoid in shape and wolf-like in texture. It hunches itself over my dear horse, revealing a spiky furred crescent, trailing right down to the base of its spine. Its legs are too long to sit easily beneath it. Rather, one is encroaching forward, and the other is tucked underneath its heavy mass. The monster stares vacantly forward and grips tightly onto its prey, and in one quick movement, it slides its resting hand quickly across in one movement. And before I can register what is happening, Delilah then meets a very familiar fate. I quickly and unsteadily find my footing, and with the assistance of the ever-growing blaze, I spot my rifle tucked into a heap of bush. As I go to grab it, I realize that my own body is rejecting my thoughts. My right hand grasps the stock of the rifle, and my left dangles by my side. It appears lifeless and mangled. 3 fingers snapped back in all sorts of funny angles. I had apparently landed on my arm quite suddenly in the prior impact. Even if the rifle was loaded with a second round, I doubt I'd have the strength to lift it. So, I made the next best choice. I ran for my goddamn life. I took off, making my way back to my home. Every so often I looked back, watching the beast make a meal of my dear girl. She didn't deserve that. Nobody did. The only thing that I was waiting for was a hand around my own throat, and my own guts hanging from my belly. But the monster did not chase. It simply watched me fumble through the darkness, and I watched the flames get ever brighter, ever bigger. I watched everything Janie and I worked for slowly crumble away into ash, with a great menacing beast standing in its wake. It took me what felt like an eternity, but the adrenaline had me running circles around any Olympic runner as I finally reached the porch steps. I stopped for a moment, looked back, and caught my breath. I coughed up a few more splatters of blood, which I carefully discarded into the dirt. I didn't want Charles to see it. I held my snapped arm with my other hand and nursed it for a moment, trying to make it look as regular and normal looking as possible. The windows were dark. Janie had obviously put Charles to bed, and the fire had been snuffed out. At this point, I'm wondering how I'm going to get my family out of our dream home. We ain't got a horse no more, and the closest neighbor is a couple miles away. But that fire is ever approaching. I can still smell the smoke, but I can also taste blood. Lots of it. I know my time is ever approaching. The least I can do is get my family to safety. I carefully pushed the wooden door open. First, I thought Janie may have locked it, but it swung open willingly. The darkness was palpable. The coals of the fireplace sizzled, and a ghastly scent was emanating from within. I called for Janie as calmly as possible. No response. I called again. No response. Then as I stepped forward, I slipped in something wet and gripped a shelf to balance myself. I couldn't see anything as I walked in. I reached our spare lantern, using my good hand to guide my way through our home. I tried my best to light it with the matches in my pocket, and when the room was finally lit, I saw hell for the first time. Their bodies, Mama, their bodies. No man should ever have to see what I saw. My God, Mama, it's all my fault. If I hadn't left, maybe I should have been with them. Maybe things would be different. That was but moments ago. Now I'm sitting here on a chair I built, in a shed I built, just wallowing away. I think to myself, what if I just sat here and waited for the flames to creep up the pasture, creep their way to my home, to my shed, my family? Should I just accept that this was the way it had to be? Then Charles's face flashes across my eyes. His laughter echoes in the back of my mind, and at times I swear I hear Janie whispering in my ear, just over my shoulder. In fact, I can hear her right now. At any moment, I could turn around, and I may just see her standing there. Maybe if I looked out the window, I'd see Charles in his cubby, singing, playing. But I was never one for fairy tales. Mama, do you remember when I were younger, and I had almost drowned in the creek by our home? For weeks you wouldn't let me out of your sight. You'd be watching me like a hawk, and I'd ask you, Mama, why do you watch me so? You looked down at me, and without a second thought you said, you'll understand when you have a family of your own. And I do. I understand. Perhaps it was too little too late. I never truly understood until tonight. And I know you'll understand why I must do what I'm about to do. I know what people are like, and I know they're going to assume things about myself. The only thing I want you to know is that I did not do it. I did not do that to my family. I have a spare pistol. It hides away in a drawer in a desk that I built. The desk I'm writing on right now. I've loaded it with 6 bullets, Ma. 5 of those are reserved for the devil that skulks and wanders our home. If those manage to take it down, which I highly doubt, the 6th bullet is reserved for myself. And if those rounds don't take the monster down, then I suppose it won't matter. And like I said, Ma, I don't miss. Regardless of what happens, I don't intend on getting away, and I do not intend on abandoning my family again. Until you see me again, it will be in a better place, a happier time. Myself, Janie, Charles, even little Matthew will be waiting. We'll be waiting for you, and we'll be a family again. I'm keeping this letter safe in a metal box, just in the shed. I'm hoping the flames don't take it. I'm hoping you'll be able to read this. I love you, Ma. You always looked out for me. Your son, Jeremiah. If you think that was terrifying, wait until you hear what happened next. I think I might have let something into the house. It's been about a week since this all happened, and I can't stop thinking about it. A close family friend needed someone to watch over their house while they went on vacation. I had done it a few times before, so they contacted me to see if I was interested in doing it again. I needed the money, so I agreed to it. They are rather affluent, and the house they live in is probably twice as large as mine. It has 2 stories, a huge front and backyard for the dog to play in, and fencing that wraps around the whole length of their property to keep their dog from wandering too far. The instructions they left me were the same as last time. Feed the dog in the morning and let it outside while I was away at work. When I got back to their house in the evening, let the dog back in the house and feed it again. Simple as that. Their dog is a golden retriever named Cooper. He's always a joy to take care of. He's very energetic, lovable, and is super friendly to everyone he meets. That's all there was to it. As long as Cooper was happy and taken care of, I'd done a good job. It was easy money. Okay, enough exposition. This happened on the last night that I was watching over their house, a day before they got back. I had fed Cooper and put him outside before I went to work. I'd fed him a little extra because I knew that I would be coming home late and I wouldn't be able to feed him at the usual time. When I finally got off work, the sun was almost set and it was beginning to get dark outside. I punched in the code to the main gate to get into the property and parked my car. This was when I first noticed something was off. Cooper usually comes to greet me when I arrive back at the house, but he was nowhere to be seen. I had brushed it off and figured it was because I came back so late in the evening. When I had finally entered the house, I saw Cooper outside, sitting behind the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. He remained still, staring into the house. It was strange seeing him like that, since he's usually jumping at the door, eager to be let inside and get his dinner and some pets. Again, I ignored it and went to fill his food bowl before letting him inside. When he sees me doing this, he usually gets ecstatic, like it's his first time seeing food. I had glanced back and saw him with that same stare, still motionless, waiting for me to open the door. And without a second thought, I did. When I opened the sliding glass door, he immediately came inside. His eyes were fixed on me as he strode into the house and once again sat down and remained still. He didn't go to his food bowl, and he didn't go lay in his bed. Nothing but an empty, unwavering stare. My first thought was that he was sick. I also thought that maybe I was just overly tired from work and was overthinking it. His owners were going to be back home the very next day, so I decided to simply wait it out and let them deal with it. By this time, it was fully dark outside, and I was sitting on the couch, watching TV in the living room. Cooper sat next to his bed at the far end of the room. I could see him out of the corner of my eye, still motionless. It was quite hard to discern over the show that I was watching, but it was definitely there. Every once in a while I would hear it, a scratching sound coming from behind me at the sliding glass door. With the TV on, and me being as tired as I was, I disregarded it, but it kept happening, over and over and over again. The scratching only intensified, and soon it was constant. There was an urgent tone to it, like whatever was scratching at the door needed to get in. Eventually, and reluctantly, I gave in and got up to see what it was. I had to do a double take when I got to the sliding glass door. Jumping at the door trying to get in was Cooper. At first, I thought it was another dog that just so happened to look exactly like Cooper, who I had let inside when I first got back to the house, and was sitting in the living room, still as a statue. But the dog that was outside looked exactly like Cooper. It had to be Cooper. His mannerisms were the same, and he was energetically jumping at the door, desperate for me to open it. And so I did. Cooper immediately went to his food bowl and started eating. I returned to the living room, only to find it empty. By this point, I was really starting to get confused. I called for the other Cooper, but heard nothing. If it had been walking, I would have been able to hear its nails tapping against the hardwood flooring of the house. I called out again, and the Cooper that I had just let inside came over to me. I could hear all four of its paws clack against the floor as he sauntered over. I walked to the stairs that led to the bottom floor of the house and called out again. Just like before, there was nothing. I didn't hear any of the doors open, so the other Cooper still must have been in the house. With Cooper by my side, we went to the guest bedroom, and I got ready for bed. I locked the door behind me and got myself settled. Cooper laid at the foot of the bed, and I tucked myself into the covers, trying to brush off the confusing nature of the night, and finally get some rest after such a long day. It wasn't long after that when I heard it, the nails of a dog walking along the hardwood floor of the house. But it was different from the sound of Cooper's. It was much, much heavier, almost as heavy as the sound a person would make, and the clacks of the nails on the floor were more spread out, as if whatever was out there was walking on 2 feet. It sounded distant, but it was getting closer. I could hear it getting louder as it took careful, slow steps up the stairs, 1 foot at a time. Eventually, it came up to the spare bedroom's door and stopped. The hallway lights were on, and they were casting a shadow of whatever was out there. The shadow was spread out, elongated, creeping under the door. And there it stood, motionless, inches away from the locked door. That was my only comfort, that the door was shut and locked with a flimsy bolt. The only thing I could do was watch the door and try to slow my alarmingly rapid heart rate. Eventually, the sun rose and the house was once again filled with the warm glow of sunlight piercing through the windows. I heard the rumbling of the garage door opening and the sound of car doors closing shut. Cooper jumped down from the bed and waited for me to let him out. My hand was shaking as I undid the bolt and slowly turned the doorknob to reveal an empty hallway. Cooper ran out, but stopped at the top of the stairs and dropped his head to smell the steps. My heart rate slowed, and I quickly got myself dressed before Cooper's owners walked into the house. I didn't want to seem like an insane person, so I didn't mention the events from the previous night. Strangely, Cooper didn't come to greet them, but instead went downstairs. After a bit of small talk with the owners, I packed up my belongings and got ready to leave. As I was saying my goodbyes to the family and made my way to the door, I glanced back and saw Cooper sitting motionless by the stairs, watching me with his big, blank eyes. From one darkness to another, this next story will leave you sleepless. In June of 1991, I saw the most memorable performance of my life. It feels like a lifetime, but I have never been so affected by a performance before. I had waited a long time for this evening. Placido Domingo, the legend, the voice that had captured the hearts of millions around the world, was going to perform Verdi's Otello. As a child, my mom and I listened to his records, watching VHS tapes of his performances, even though the video quality was quite poor. Now I stood here, finally, in the Grand Opera House of the Wiener Staatsoper in Vienna, anticipation building inside me as the lights dimmed, and Placido's almost unreal presence filled the stage. His performance was flawless. More than flawless. His voice was strong, commanding, and powerful, carrying us into the tragedy of Otello. Every note, every movement was perfect and refined. The audience sat spellbound, mesmerized by the pure magic of his art. When the final note faded and the curtain closed, there was a brief moment when the audience, struck by awe, sat in complete silence. The silence was charged with tension, the air electric, and then applause. We all rose to our feet, clapping in praise and admiration for the performance we had just witnessed. The applause was well-deserved. After all, Placido was a genius. I clapped along, cheering with intensity, my heart pounding with excitement. I had never before felt so overwhelmed with emotion during a performance. The crowd was full of energy, and the sound of thousands of clapping hands at once was like an unbridled force of nature. Placido came back on stage, bowing deeply, his face glowing with humility and pride. The applause intensified, the sound echoing off the ornate walls of the opera house. Naturally, he was, after all, a living legend. He bowed again, waved, and left the stage for the second time, but the applause continued. The clapping had now gone on for quite a while. 3 to 5 minutes? Anyway, it felt like it would never end. At first, I reveled in it. We were all celebrating a transcendent moment, a kind of collective worship. But soon a strange sensation crept in. The clapping felt different now, more forced, more relentless, as if we had all agreed to keep going without knowing why. 7 minutes. A faint pressure started building at my temples. I shifted on my feet, glanced at the faces around me. Everyone was still clapping, smiling, enthralled. Should I stop? No one else was stopping. I scanned the room, hoping to catch someone's eye, someone who might share my hesitation. But they were all enraptured, clapping like their lives depended on it. I checked my watch. 17 minutes. You don't understand how long 17 minutes are until you've clapped through every second of them. My palms had started to ache, the skin warm with friction. Each minute felt like an entire year passing, each second a weight dragging me deeper into this overwhelming experience. The noise, it was unbearable. It had started as a simple, rhythmic applause, a natural reaction to the performance. But now it had become something else. The clapping had intensified, deafening, like a tidal wave crashing over me again and again. The sound filled every corner of the hall, overwhelming my senses. 25 minutes. My ears were buzzing from the constant assault, so loud it seemed to drill into my skull. The pressure. The pain blossomed deep inside my head, spreading to my temples, distorting my brain. The lights above us burned too bright, the air grew too thick, and I swear for just a moment, the walls began to close in. And then I felt it with a sickening warmth, the wet trickle running down my neck. I raised my hands, trembling, and touched my ear. Blood. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound, the immense pounding of 1,000 hands, thundered in my head, each clap like the precise strike of a hammer, ringing and pounding with intense force. I wanted to scream, but my voice was lost in the noise. I looked around, desperate, but no one seemed to notice. Their faces were blank, their eyes glazed, their hands moving in that endless mechanical rhythm. The room began to blur, the faces around me turning into indistinct shapes, their hands nothing more than ghostly blurs in the low light. 33 minutes. The clapping reached new heights. I winced as another wave of applause crashed against my head, and the ringing in my ears grew into a scream. My palms ached, my arms trembling, but I couldn't stop. There was a weight in the air, as if being the first to stop clapping would betray the moment, a sin against the magic we had all witnessed. My palms began to burn. At first, it was a faint warmth like friction against the skin, but now the heat grew sharper, stinging. I looked down and saw small red lines blooming in the center of my palms, the skin raw and tender. I kept clapping. I couldn't stop, my heart beat in time with it, each pulse reverberating in my temples, in my ears. 51 minutes. Placido appeared again, a sound wave so loud I felt my bones tremble. Little pricks of pain in my skin. I looked down. The skin had split in places, my hands slick with blood. My elbows ached, they shook with each clap, the joints grinding together like rusty metal. I felt the tendons in my arms tighten like an overstretched harp string about to snap. Placido stood on the stage, his face shadowed by the stage lights. He bowed deeply once more, but there was something wrong with his smile. It stretched too far. It was as if he was no longer real, just another part of this nightmare we had created. The clapping echoed even louder, a thunderous sound that felt like it would never end. the unbearable pain, the assault. But I couldn't stop. I won't be the first to stop, and in doing so, dishonor the great Placido Domingo. A full hour passed. The woman next to me groaned, her eyes wide and glittering with fear. Her hands were red, slick with blood like mine. She looked at me, her lips trembling, as if she wanted to say something, anything, but she didn't. She just kept clapping. The ringing in my ears had become deafening. Each clap felt like an explosion inside my head. I could feel the blood running faster, soaking the collar of my shirt, the pain blinding, suffocating. It drowned all thoughts, reason, and logic. 64 minutes. Would this ever end? Could it end? Placido bowed again, and I kept clapping. One horror fades into the shadows, but another lurks just around the corner. I quit cryptid hunting. Hello, everyone. My name is Alex. I'm a cryptid hunter who travels across many states that claim to have them. Goatman, Michigan Dogman, Werewolf, Yeti. Hell, I even dived into Loch Ness River just to find the monster before the picture was confirmed to be fake. Anyway, one day I was scrolling through the news on a boring Monday morning and I came across this one. 8 missing people. A mine in Tennessee closed. Well, if anyone read it, they would think, oh, that's sad, and then scroll away, right? But for me, I can feel something. I feel like I'm being called to that place. I feel like there's something that must be inside that mine. So I decided to go and explore that mine. Oh, I wish I hadn't gone to that place. When I arrived at the mine, I found it located in a mountain near a rural area of Tennessee. It was fairly old and in pretty shabby condition. The cave was completely dark inside. As I was about to take a photo with my old camera, well, I guess God wasn't on my side because a heavy rain started pouring down and I had to seek shelter behind a big tree behind me. Nope, I take my words back. Lightning struck the tree I was taking shelter in, causing it to start falling apart. In a panic, I tried to run into the mine for safety, but I slipped in the mud and fell inside. Now, I am safe inside the mine, but the tree has completely blocked the entrance. Oh, for fuck's sake, I said to myself. I tried looking for my flashlight, but nope. Nowhere to be found. I guess I dropped it when I slipped in the mud. Right now, I only have a dying phone and a shabby old camera. I tried calling the rescue team, but there's no signal in here at all. While I was panicking, I saw a huge map nailed into the wall, and there was good news and bad news. The good news is that this mine has a second exit. The bad news is, it's so far away from where I am. Fuck. Do I really have to go all the way there with the light from a dying phone? Then I have an idea. The camera produces a little flash of light, right? I could use the flash of my camera as a light source. I took a picture in front of me, click, click. The mine that was once pitch black was brightened up for only a few milliseconds, but I could see everything clearly. After a while of walking and taking pictures, I smell something very awful. It smelled like a bunch of dead fish that had been rotten for decades under a rotten sock. I know this isn't normal, but I must go forward. Click, click, click. As I walk, the stench is getting worse and worse, to the point I puked along the way. I took another picture and heard a grunting sound. What I saw was a man. He was covering his eyes in pain. Ag. He grunted before looking at me. How do I describe his face? He looks like he was forced to watch his family murdered right in front of him. He looked so pale and shocked, and his whole body was shaking. Then he rushed toward me and covered my mouth. Don't you dare make that sound, he whispered in a shaken voice. I took his hand off my face, and I have to admit that he smells awful, but this is not the time to complain. I asked, "What are you doing here?" He grabbed onto my shirt and angrily whispered, "I said don't make a sound." "Geez, I get it, I whispered back to him. We had a little conversation, we exchanged our names, and his name is Jim. Jim, are you one of the missing miners? I asked him. Missing? What? How long has it been? He asked me. Not that long, only a few days, I answered. What? But it felt like years had passed. Wait, if you came all the way here, then you know where the exit is, right? You know where it is, right? Can you take me there? Can you? He asked me so many questions that my brain couldn't even process them. We heard a loud screech, a blood-curdling screech, which was followed by rapid footsteps. It sounded like someone was running so fast that the ground tremors. Oh shit! He quietly whispered before dragging me to the wall of the cave. I can feel it. I know something just ran through me. Jim covered my mouth and made a shh finger. I looked around as my eyes adapted to darkness, and I saw it. It's a man. A very tall man, probably over 7'1". He looks malnourished because he is very thin, and I could see his ribs, spine, and tail? No, that is not a man. That thing, it looked at us. And what I saw is no. Its face is of a bat. Its body is covered in fur, and the place where its eyes were supposed to be are replaced by 2 big ears. It looked around trying to locate us, but failed, and then it screeched. It let out a deafening screech that made both of us dizzy, but we were too scared to move, let alone make a single noise. It's upset that it couldn't find its prey. Then it started to run, and oh Lord, it's so fast. It's almost as if that thing disappeared in front of our eyes. Jim let go of his hand and let out a huge yet small sigh. "Well, that thing almost got us," he whispered. "What the hell was that?" I asked him. "Do I fucking know? That thing, it killed my friend, my dad, my brothers, and now it wants me dead. We're never getting out of this place, man," he sobbed. "No, we will get out of this fucking hellhole. I already took the picture of a map, and both of us will make it to another exit," I told Jim, trying to encourage him. "You did?" he asked me. Yeah. I can see a faint smile forming on his face when I told him we have a map. "We will make it out of this hellhole, I swear. I am discussing with Jim about what to do next as I am typing right now. I will give an update soon when I have time. Oh, and my phone is muted, by the way. Please give me advice on how I can get the hell out of this place. As for why I'm not using the lights from my phone, well, it's because my phone is pretty much dying and I wanted to use it for emergency. But don't get too comfortable. Our next story takes fear to a whole new level." Falling into the stars, I sat up suddenly in my bed, sweating and breathing heavily. Something felt wrong. The sheets under me were smooth, but felt like they had no texture. I ran my fingers over them, but it was like my nerves couldn't register the touch properly anymore. Like my senses had been muffled by a thick fog. The air was dense, and the dim light coming from my bedside lamp seemed to have a strange vibration. My heart pounding in my chest, an immediate sense of dread washing over me. The window looked out into the blackness of the night, a void that seemed to stretch on forever, and yet it felt like something was watching me from the darkness. And then it happened. I wasn't lying in bed anymore. I wasn't even standing. I was floating? No, falling. But not down. Up. Gravity had flipped like a switch, and I was being pulled through the ceiling, as if it didn't exist anymore. My mind couldn't process it at first, like it was stuck in a loop of denial. There was no transition, no sensation of breaking through solid material. I just slipped through. My heart raced as panic set in, limbs flailing in the empty air. I was being dragged upwards, faster and faster toward the night sky. My room disappeared beneath me, shrinking into nothing. I saw the roof of my house, my street, my town below me, but they weren't familiar anymore. They looked distorted, as though I was seeing them through ripples of water, warped and twisted. I accelerated faster up toward the stars. The night sky began to change as I accelerated upward. The sky above was no longer black. It was pulsing with hues, reds, greens, yellows, colors that felt impossible. And the stars, if they even were stars, seemed to shimmer in patterns that felt alive, writhing in the sky like they were putting on a show for me. My breath came in ragged gasps, my body fighting the surreal sensation of weightlessness. Every instinct in me desperately tried to grab hold of something, anything, but there was nothing to grab onto, just the endless sky. What is happening? My mind scrambled for answers, but the thoughts came disjointed, fragmented. The world had turned on its head. No, reality had. Before I could scream, the stars themselves seemed to expand, each one growing larger and larger until I realized they weren't stars at all. They were openings, holes, gateways into something else, something far beyond my understanding. And then I saw it. A ship. Not a ship like the ones we know. No metal hull, no lights blinking, no engines burning. This thing, it was alive. A mass of shimmering, undulating flesh and darkness, pulsating with veins that stretched into infinity. The closer I got, the more everything around me lost shape and meaning, bending and folding in on itself, as though reality was being torn apart. I didn't want to get closer. Everything in my being was screaming no, but I was being pulled faster and faster. And then everything stopped. It was as if I blinked and I was suddenly inside of it. The ship, the creature, I couldn't tell anymore. I was surrounded by a pulsating glow and I could feel it in my mind. The space around me was filled with a low, vibrating hum that penetrated my bones. The sound wasn't just something I heard, it was something I felt deep inside me, like the vibration of my own blood was shifting to match it. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My throat was paralyzed, my mouth open in a silent cry of terror. The walls, if you could call them that, were smooth and veiny, glistening with a slick, oily substance that moved in slow, deliberate waves. It was like I was inside a lung, or a heart of some grotesque, living machine. Every inch of this place felt sentient, aware of me, of my fear. The air was thick with a metallic tang, like iron, and it felt as though something was crawling on my skin, something invisible. That's when I saw them. They weren't like any aliens from movies or books. No little gray men or insectoid creatures. No, these things were impossible. They defied shape, flickering in and out of existence, their forms bending and stretching in ways that hurt my eyes, like looking at something beyond the third dimension. Their skin, if it could be called skin, shimmered with translucent patterns, like galaxies spiraling across them, as though they contained entire universes within them. And they spoke, not in words, but in thoughts. My mind felt like it was being ripped apart as their presence pushed into my consciousness, probing, searching. I could feel them rummaging through my memories, my thoughts, my very essence. It was like they were dissecting my soul, peeling back layers of who I was to examine something much deeper. "You are ready," the thought came. It wasn't a voice, not in the traditional sense, but a deep, resonating vibration in my mind. I could feel the weight of those words pressing down on me, crushing me from within. Ready for what? I tried to think, but the question came out broken, fragmented. I didn't know what I was asking or who I was asking it to. The aliens, or whatever they were, seemed to pulse in response, their shapes flickering faster, almost as if they were laughing at me. My body convulsed, jerking involuntarily as they dug deeper into my psyche. I was nothing to them, less than nothing, a speck, a fleeting thought in the grand cosmic scale of their existence. Time ceased to exist. Minutes, hours, maybe days passed, but I couldn't tell. My mind was unraveling, coming apart at the seams. The things I was shown, the things they forced me to see, I can't describe them. Not fully. They were wrong in ways that go beyond words. I saw the end of the universe, but not just our universe. I saw other realities colliding and merging, being torn apart by forces beyond comprehension. I watched entire universes be born and then die. I saw beings of light and darkness, things that existed outside of time, feeding on entire galaxies. I saw what comes next. And then, as quickly as it had begun, it ended. The floor of the ship disappeared, revealing the endless space below. I was falling again. This time, down. My body spiraled through the void, falling faster and faster until I back in my bed. My room was there. My house. Everything was as it had been. I sat up, gasping for air. My heart pounded in my chest, the echoes of that strange, pulsating hum still vibrating in my bones. I looked outside. The sky was clear, the stars twinkling innocently above. But I knew they were out there watching. I know now, they're always watching. And I can feel them, every night, just beyond the edges of reality. I'm terrified to slip through again. Just when you thought it couldn't get worse, our next story pushes the limits of terror. A carnival I went to in 1964 ended in disaster. One night many years ago, I went to see a fortune teller at a carnival on the outskirts of the town I used to live in. I was 21 years old, in love with a girl I had no idea if she liked me back, and I had no idea about what I should do. Or at least that was the case until a friend of mine whispered to me about the carnival and how I could see a woman there who could offer me some insight. It wasn't news to me because so many people I knew quietly whispered about her to me and how good she was. And if I'm being completely honest, there was the subtle element of a dare in how everyone quietly mentioned it to me. So once I had decided to do it, I went to see her late one summer night. I had to drive way out in the middle of nowhere to get there. I had been camping plenty of times before, but never that deep in the woods. It was so thick it almost didn't feel real. And the carnival that had been set up there seemed even less real. As I walked towards the ticket booth, The crickets and other insects humming in the air seemed unnaturally loud as they zoomed past me. Behind the ticket booth, the carnival itself seemed to loom out of nature so vividly that it was like a hallucination. And when I actually set foot inside, it was like sensory overload. Everywhere I looked, there was something to see. Some vendor selling something, or some performer displaying some type of skill, or putting on a performance while people gathered around. There were a million smells. Some were the usual fried carnival foods, and others were things I had never encountered before or since. Some of it smelled delicious, and some of it smelled off. But either way, it was all memorable. The space was illuminated by strands of lights that were suspended above our heads by tall wooden posts. I could see numerous bugs fluttering around the lights as I walked on. It seemed like I had to walk forever until I finally reached the tent where I had been told I'd find the woman I'd been sent to see. There was no line, and a small sign instructed me to enter. Not only was she dressed casually like any other woman you'd encounter anywhere, she also looked beyond ordinary. The only thing that gave away even the slightest hint that she was in any way unique were her eyes. They were blue, but they seemed to cut through the darkness with a sharpness I had never seen before. It was with those eyes she read tarot cards and my palm for me by the flickering light of a few candles that were placed in the middle of a large table. There was also plenty of incense burning, and the combination of that, along with the heat and being inside the closed tent, was beyond heady. "Don't worry," she eventually murmured. "The opportunity will present itself to you, and you will recognize it." And when she was done speaking at length, and it was time for me to go, I mentioned I was going to see the show taking place in the main tent. This got a humorless laugh out of her. "What?" I asked. I never found it particularly entertaining. If anything, it always struck me as beyond morbid, and a bit like the people in the show were tempting fate. That made me stop. Why was that? But before I could ask her, she merely smiled and said, "Don't worry, you can go. Nothing bad will happen to you." Since the show was about to start, I dutifully left the other half of the money promised after she had done her job and left her tent. After being in the closed tent with incense burning, the fresh air felt beyond refreshing on my skin, and I gladly took several deep breaths while I headed for the nightly show in the main tent that was being advertised on signs all throughout the carnival. It was only long after the night was over that I really thought about what she said, how she had emphasized the "you" part of her statement. But of course, this was a long time ago, long before the thought of doom lurking around every potential corner was at the forefront of our brains. Especially because back then, one typically did not readily admit to seeing a fortune teller. As a born and raised New Englander, I was raised, like most of my peers were, with a thorough knowledge of the area's history and the fears of witchcraft that defined an era. And old habits die hard indeed. Back then, things like freak shows, carnivals, and the circus were a novelty, because if you wanted to see and experience bizarre things and outrageous behavior, you had to deliberately seek it out and make an effort to see it. Unlike today, where everywhere you look, there's a metaphorical circus or freak show, and thanks to the internet, you can look at it anytime you want from the comfort of your own home. If you've ever wondered why freak shows fell out of fashion, it's because in reality they didn't. They just got rid of the giant tent, called them something different, and eventually daily life turned into one. I tell you this to understand why there's the notion back then that people viewed carnivals and stuff like that with such suspicion. It's like the idea that you should never ride a ride at certain places because it was probably assembled in the parking lot by someone on minimum wage in an hour who may or may not have been sober. For better or worse, many things that people don't even blink at now had a much seedier reputation decades ago. But none of this was in my head as I walked towards the largest tent and joined the trickle of people going inside and getting seats around a large ring that was separated from the audience by tall metal dividers. There was a sense of excitement in the air, and it didn't take me long to get inside and find myself a seat that was both close to the exit and offered an excellent view of the ring. This was in July of 1964. And I don't know if the heat around that time period set any records, but it certainly felt like it. But isn't that how it goes? The summers of youth are always the hottest and brightest, just like the winters of one's childhood are always the ones with the purest and heaviest snow. That's how it should be. Of course, the flip side is that the terrors of childhood can also cast the longest and most intimidating shadow. So I cannot be sure whether on record the humidity was so thick you could cut it with a knife, but it certainly felt that way. As I sat there, the sweat was dribbling off my nose, and I could feel my shirt was soaked before too long. And I wasn't the only one, because I could see that for several clowns who were also gathered in the audience, their makeup was beginning to run. The effect was more than a little creepy. The first thing that comes to mind when I think of that night is the tent. This was no crisp red tent you see like in the circus. No, this thing was old, faded, and stained in spots. And within minutes, you could smell the sweat pouring off everyone with a vengeance. It all definitely made for an atmospheric experience. Even today, I can still see how frayed and patched together the section of tent by my seat was. Although it wasn't exactly a full house, there was a good-sized audience, and literally every single one of us was melting by the time the light started to dim to signal the show was about to start. We were all fanning ourselves or using handkerchiefs to try to dab away the sweat while the ringleader strolled out. He was tall, lean, and wiry, and dressed to impress in a red velvet suit with gold tassels, along with white riding pants and black leather boots. He was by far the best-dressed person I'd ever seen. And it was worth every penny they spent on it, because the minute he stepped into the ring and the spotlight lit up his features, he looked flawless. Not only did he ooze charisma just standing there, he didn't seem to be uncomfortable at all. And I didn't see a drop of sweat anywhere. It was bizarre. A hush fell over the people gathered as the ringleader stood there silently, waiting to grip us in the palm of his hand with whatever he had planned. Then he began to speak, and if his presence was impressive, that voice was in a league of its own. It was otherworldly, simultaneously commanding and inviting, a rich, gentle hum that could lull you to sleep and snap you to attention at the same time. "Welcome, ladies and gentlemen," he greeted us with a dazzling smile that lit up the space. "Thank you for joining us tonight. For your viewing pleasure, something you won't see anywhere else, I present to you the Beast." Right when he spoke, several of the lights illuminating the front of the ring dimmed so that all of the attention was in the back of the tent, where there was the slight ruffle of the tent canvas being opened that was followed by a loud shriek as the sound of something large and metal moving towards us grew slightly louder. We all craned our necks to look and saw the sight of a massive steel cage in the back of the arena containing something huge being placed strategically in the space. As my eyes adjusted, I could see it was being manned by 4 huge men that if they weren't bodybuilders, they could easily be mistaken for them. One of them took some keys out and unlocked the cage, and the massive shape inside lurched out and stumbled into the space. There was a shudder of nerves in the audience, and I saw that it was what looked like a giant dog on 2 legs. Or at least that's what it seemed. It could have easily been a guy in a costume, or any other number of tricks. But if it was the best trick I've ever seen, because it looked beyond realistic, with glowing red eyes that loomed out of the sticky night air. I watched as the ringleader casually extended his arm, and saw that he was now clutching the end of a rope that seemed to have appeared from nowhere. With a well-practiced maneuver, he gracefully used it to climb onto a raised wooden platform overlooking the space that was safely out of reach of what he called the Beast. Although we could all see now that there was a massive metal collar around its neck that was attached to a chain, the end of which was being tightly gripped by a team consisting of the 4 massive men, plus 2 more additional men that had come out of nowhere. All of us silently sat there, rooted to our seats, and not knowing what the Beast would do as it slowly walked into the ring, looked around at the audience, and silently took everything in. I was vaguely aware of the ringmaster calmly informing the audience that this was a rare monster found somewhere in the woods in the Midwest, but all of my attention was on the Beast. I was relieved I was sitting farther back and had all the other people in front of me, because, had I been closer, I would have sworn this giant dog thing would have been able to pick up my scent and remember it forever. Don't ask me why I thought that, but I felt it as sure as I was sitting there. The beast itself was just standing there, taking everything in. If I didn't know better, I'd say it looked bored. But moments later, something in the tent changed. I could feel it in the air as sure as the pressure from a thunderstorm, because I wasn't surprised when the beast suddenly turned around and looked off to the right. All previous boredom was gone as it crouched down and began to growl. There were more than a few yelps and whimpers in the audience as the ringmaster let out a knowing chuckle and said, "Don't worry, ladies and gentlemen, everything is all right." Right on cue, as if to mock him, the beast dropped all subtlety and began to roar at someone in the audience before rushing forward and attempting to lunge into the crowd. The men holding the chain frantically tugged it back, but I could see them straining to keep the thing under control. From somewhere deep inside the tent, several more men came forward in an attempt to restrain the dog monster, which now had its massive claws out and was swinging them in every direction. That is the moment when everything started to fall apart. From somewhere inside the tent, someone screamed, and that one scream turned into several with plenty of yelling and even a little swearing to join it, while many people started to leave their seats, me included. You know those stories where someone owns a big dog, and it comes running up to a person, and the owner frantically tries to assure you he's friendly, and it turns out he's not? What happened next was that dialed up to 1,000. It even came with the ringmaster loudly trying to reassure us everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Because we could all see with our own eyes that literally nothing was fine, as the giant dog man thing was trying to attack anything and everything in sight. And unfortunately for one of the men trying to control it, the beast landed a blow on his arm, and its giant claws ripped into flesh like a saw. Within moments, the coppery scent of blood filled the oppressive tent air, and we were all choking on the smell while frantically trying to reach the exit. Several people tripped on the run towards it, and as a result, several other carnival goers were inadvertently also dragged to the ground in the mayhem. From somewhere inside the pandemonium, I saw one of the men take out a giant syringe and attempt to jab the beast with it. I can't be 100% sure because I was fleeing with the crowd, but I'm pretty sure he pulled it off because the beast let out an angry howl a moment later. As we all stumbled our way out of the tent into the thick night air, there were a few people staring at us, but once they got sight of several people covered in blood, they got the message and started to run. At one point, I looked back, and one of the smaller tents had caught fire, and it was kicking up some incredibly thick black smoke that you could smell for what seemed like an unnaturally long distance. After about an hour of running through tents and general chaos, I made it to the parking lot and found my car. People were roaring out of there in cars in any possible direction, and I was no exception. Once I got my car started, I punched the gas and floored it out of there. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I was soaked in sweat as I left the chaos in the rearview mirror. But the story of that night wasn't over. Because once I managed to get away from the chaos, I drove to a diner I knew well about 30 miles away. It was late by then, and all the adrenaline had made me hungry and in need of caffeine. So I walked inside, grabbed a seat at the empty counter, and looked at a menu. "Fancy seeing you here," an amused voice said. I quickly looked up and found myself face to face with the girl I was interested in. "I had no idea you worked here." "I didn't until last week. Picked up a shift here to put some extra money away for when I go back to college this fall." "Makes sense. So do you know what you want?" Yeah, I'll take the patty melt, some fries, and some coffee." Then she wrote it down, placed the order, and brought me my coffee. 2 sugars. And then we started talking. And talking. And when my food came, she talked and I listened. Then we both shared a piece of apple pie with ice cream, because by then it was just the 2 of us left in the place. And we've been together ever since, and still talking after all these years. I also kept waiting for word of the carnival incident to make the front page news, but it never did. Not the front page, the second page, or even a mention in the back. Nor was there ever any report on the evening news. It just ceased to be mentioned. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Just like I'm not sure how I feel that no one ever asked me what happened there, or how my trip to the carnival went. No one, be it a journalist, cop, or one of my friends, ever asked me about that night. The terror isn't over yet. In fact, it's only just begun with this next twisted tale. Every night, I hear knocking sounds beneath me. It all started a few weeks ago. I had already been living in the house for just over 2 years by then, and had plenty of time to get used to every surface it had to offer. It might not be the most normal house one could find, but nothing strange had occurred until then. The layout could sometimes be a bit odd, and it felt as if the rooms were placed haphazardly, but apart from that, it was generally a very spacious and pleasant house. The reason I moved there was because my mother had recently passed away, and I wanted to spend as much time with my father as I could before he also passed. I was in bed and just about to close my eyes when I heard a dull but recurring noise coming from below me. I was confused since I lived alone. I concluded that I must have left something on by mistake. Perhaps the washing machine? I reluctantly got out of bed and walked with tired steps down to the bathroom. But the closer I got, the clearer it became that the noise wasn't coming from there. It still seemed to come from below me, from the basement. I must confess something to you. I'm not exactly the bravest person you'd meet. I really didn't want to go down there. I knew it was probably just an animal, but I still didn't want to risk getting infected by something. I decided to just ignore the noise and try to go back to sleep instead. The next morning, I had forgotten what happened, and the noise was pretty much gone. Unfortunately, it didn't stop there. Every night it was the same thing. The dull but regular noises filled my bedroom, and I started to become more and more worried. Eventually, one day I decided to walk down to the basement during the daytime to see exactly what was going on down there. It felt safer then somehow. When I got down, everything seemed just as it should be. Everything was in its place, and I didn't see any animals anywhere. I was really confused. Something didn't feel right. The noises were only heard at night, and I had no idea why. I told myself that they would surely stop soon. I really wish that was how it turned out, but I was wrong. One night I had enough. I found a flashlight and headed down to the basement fully awake. When I opened the basement door, the noises were still going strong. I listened for where the sounds might be coming from, and it led me deeper into the basement. I opened the door to a storage room, and what awaited me on the other side I could never have imagined. The storage room didn't look like I remembered it. There was a door and a window on the wall that I had never seen before. But that wasn't the worst part. On the other side of the glass, there stood a painted old man. His face was painted white, and he waved me in. I really wasn't prepared for this, and something felt so wrong about him. What was a painted old man doing in my basement? He almost looked like a black and white TV character from bygone times. He must have been completely insane. I felt my hair stand on end and my heart thumped in my chest. I turned to leg it at that moment, but then the old man said something that immediately made me change my mind. "I have someone you hold dear in here," I gasped. Then I noticed that the door further back in the room he was in opened, and the one who opened it was my father. But I swear it wasn't him. He looked completely lifeless as he stood next to the painted old man. "Open the door with the key on the hook over there," said the old man, pointing at the hook. There was indeed a key. I was paralyzed. I barely dared to breathe. I chose to trust my instincts and ran from there. Even if it was true that he was in there with him, it would be better if the police handled it. But it didn't add up. How could he have gotten there? And why did the painted old man want me to open a door that had never existed before? I tried with all my might to wake up, but this was no dream. I was immediately thrown back to reality when I heard the old man go back to banging on the door again. But this time, the knocking was less controlled and more desperate. I swallowed and quickly hurried up the stairs. When I got up, I heard a scream, my father's scream, but it didn't sound genuine. Or maybe I just imagined it because I didn't want to believe it was true. I locked the basement door and took out my mobile phone to dial 911. I spent the rest of the night sitting quietly in the living room. It's indescribable how relieved I was when I heard police sirens. I unlocked the basement door and 2 constables went down. After a while, they came back and told me they hadn't found anything. But, didn't you see an old-fashioned indoor window in a storage room? I asked, puzzled. No, not that we know of, said one of the constables. I shook it off and realized I must have fallen asleep or something. I apologized for the inconvenience and didn't want to pursue it further, since the last thing I wanted was for them to think I was losing my mind. Something about that experience felt so personal, but I couldn't remember ever falling asleep. The worst part is that the banging noises still continue to this day. I'm thinking about moving, because to be honest, I can't take it anymore. My father actually passed away just recently, and I miss him deeply. I hope I wasn't the cause. One nightmare closes its door, but the next one is wide open, waiting for you. Why, Marlon? It's been 2 days, and I can't remember ever being so unsure about anything in my life. Google seemed pointless. My bank account couldn't support a visit, and I exhausted all the forums I could find to no avail. My home life was in shambles, and my work life wasn't far behind. Trying to get a grip, I splashed water on my face. I looked at the door, then down at the floor. A small shadow slowly crept up, filling the light-filled gap with darkness. In the silence of my home, the only sound I could hear was a beat. My heart pounded as if it might leap out of my chest. Then the scratching started, slow, taunting, each swipe drawing closer to the door. The sound of claws methodically peeling through the wood sent shivers down my spine. "Stop, Marlon," I yelled, watching the shadow under the door slowly back away, but not fade. Grabbing a towel off the rack, I dried my still wet face. This was not the time to lose my cool. I'd done this 100 times. Tonight would be no different. Giving myself what should have been an unnecessary pep talk only made me feel more uneasy. Looking at the floor again was an obvious mistake. The shadow paced back and forth in front of the door, and in the silence of my apartment, I could hear his panting. Every step he took seemed to vibrate through the bathroom. That pep talk felt more useless than ever. I turned my gaze to the toilet. I realized I hadn't used the bathroom since I'd come in. Maybe that could ease the tension and help me settle down for bed. Tomorrow was a big day, and I had to get some rest. Glancing at my watch, it showed 22:45. Standing in front of the toilet, I tried to relieve myself, knowing full well there was nothing to relieve. I was just going through the motions. Shaking my head, I realized my procrastination was getting the better of me. Zipping up my pants and turning back to the sink, it felt like déjà vu. Once again, I was ready to splash my face with water. Glancing at the floor, the shadow was gone. Only the hallway light shone through the gap. With a gulp for reassurance, I grabbed the door handle and opened it. The door slammed into the doorstop and bounced back, almost hitting me. I quickly grabbed it and peered out to see if the coast was clear. My bedroom door was open, and the lights were still on as I had left them. I saw no sign of Marlon, so I quietly tiptoed to my room. As soon as I felt the carpet under my feet, I slammed the door shut and heard his paws skidding across the hardwood, racing toward my door. Almost simultaneously, Marlon threw his body against the door just as I locked it and leaned against it for extra defense. The next thud pushed me off the door momentarily, and I scrambled back to brace myself against it. Another thud hit the door, but this time it only moved me an inch or two. My feet felt as if they were rooted to the carpet. "That's it, Marlon. I'm not playing with you. Go to bed," I yelled, trying to put some authority in my voice, sliding my hand back on the door. That was the most I dared to do, fearing to truly invoke his wrath. Marlon slowly paced outside the door. His tail tapped the door with every pass he made. I pressed my back against the door, ready for the next impact, but it never came. I slowly backed away from the door, not letting it out of my sight as I made my way to the bed. My heart raced, and I knew that wasn't going to help me sleep. Sliding into bed, I pulled the covers up and adjusted my pillows. If I didn't know my age, I'd think I was a kid still afraid of the boogeyman. Except I'm not a child. The boogeyman is real and outside my door in the form of my best friend trying to get inside me. Slapping myself back into reality seemed like the only thing left to do. but my hands refused to move from gripping the covers. Closing my eyes, I tried to calm myself. I envisioned my presentation in the morning to the partners. I'd been rehearsing it all week, practicing the Q&A section. Now, I just needed some rest. As I stood in front of the partners and other associates, speaking, a weird feeling crept over me, like something was wrong. All eyes were on me, unblinking. Silence filled the room, except for my voice. I glanced at Rob, our newest assistant, and instantly sensed something was off. Rob wasn't using his cell phone. That thing is usually glued to his palm. He's a junior associate, yet he acts as if he's already made partner, always busy with his phone, every call so important. But now he gave me the attention he usually reserved for his phone, and it sent chills up my spine. That's when I noticed the sweat dripping off him. His shirt was soaked, the wet spot visible through his jacket. They all were sweating as if trapped in a sauna, every single one of them. It looked like they'd just played full-court basketball in their suits and come straight to work. Not one of them wiped their brow, fanned themselves, or even took a sip of water. Even Suzanne, our meeting stenographer, sat in her seat in the corner, her hands over the typewriter without hitting a key, sweating, her eyes locked on me like a torpedo in the water. Frazzled by the bizarre scene, I started to stutter and looked toward the exit. Elliot Marcus, one of our senior partners, stood straight up from his chair. It flew back, crashing into the office wall with a thud, leaving an imprint as it slowly rolled away. He was always the gym rat of the office, an Armenian refugee from the circus who used to joke at the coffee pot. He strutted around the office, showing off his muscles, stacking chairs, lifting them, or asking for critiques on his poses. In the courtroom, his stature matched his wits and law knowledge. Elliot was a force to be reckoned with, and now he was walking right toward me, with that blank stare in his eyes that somehow felt menacing. I don't know why, I'm not usually like this, but I grabbed the first thing I could touch and hurled it at him. It happened to be another empty chair at the table. Without even flinching, the chair hit him square in the face. Blood began to ooze from his nose, and that scared me even more than him not stopping, even more than the room's continued staring and sweating. The blood was as black as obsidian. I bolted for the door, keeping it in my peripheral vision. Elliot leaped across the table like a gazelle clearing a fence. The force knocked me against the wall, and he pinned me there. That's when I saw it. Everything before made sense. My initial worry turned into genuine fear. My worst nightmare had left my home and was now in the world. Worse than that, it was at my job, inside my coworkers. Inside the lens of Elliot's eye was that white ring that wasn't a ring. It was more like a silver or very opaque tiny worm. I'd never gotten close enough to examine it in detail, but I knew what was coming next, and I desperately tried to avoid it. Elliot's hands felt like iron clamps, locking me against the wall. I jerked my head back and forth, refusing to stare into his face, looking for anything to grab that might free me before the inevitable. His sweaty hands felt gross, like grabbing a toad, rough but slimy. Elliot released my right hand and immediately grabbed my throat, straightening my face and choking me. That blank stare in his eyes and the little worm floating around in there locked me in terror. Elliot's mouth began to open, his jaw unlocking. I couldn't scream because I could barely breathe with his hands around my neck. Then that ring, that worm or parasite floated to the bottom of his lens almost lifeless. 6 long, white, almost luminescent tentacles emerged from Elliot's mouth, slowly reaching for my face. The more I fought, the tighter his grip became. I had to fight. I couldn't let this thing get me like this. I used my free hand and bashed Elliot's face repeatedly to no avail. Just before it latched onto my face, I used my last bit of strength and let out a scream. Jumping up in my bed, I realized I must have dozed off. My sheets and clothes were soaked. I looked at the clock on my nightstand. It read 2:45. I had to get up and try to dry off. I still needed to get back to sleep. Maybe some tea would settle my mind, but looking at my door, I almost immediately changed my mind. Sitting in the darkness with a million thoughts flying through my brain, I couldn't help but think about when this all started. Last weekend. It seemed like a normal Saturday. Marlon and I went to the dog park, but that day I just had an eerie feeling inside. The dog park on Saturdays was usually bustling. Marlin almost always had a handful of playmates. I was actually shocked that Buster and Bob weren't there. They were dog park regulars. If I couldn't expect to see anyone else, I knew I'd see Bob. But last Saturday, the park was completely empty. Marlin also seemed apprehensive about going in at first. I figured it was because he'd be stuck playing fetch with me. Looking back, I wish I'd picked up on his hesitation and gone with my first instinct to head back home. But we pushed on, and after a little leash fight, we were through the gates and into the park. As soon as I unhooked him, Marlin took off across the field and into the tree line. There was a small rustle in the bushes, and Marlin let out a cry I'd never heard from him before. He retreated from the bushes by the time I reached him. At first, I thought it was maybe a squirrel or worse, a skunk. Checking him thoroughly and sniffing him, it didn't seem to be either. I shrugged it off as something that just spooked him. We left shortly after, since he didn't seem to want to play anymore. All his attention was on the bushes he'd come out of, as if in a trance. The ball flew by him, and he didn't even budge. After trying a few more times, I gave up. The rest of the day seemed fine. I went to work and checked on him using my indoor cameras, as I usually do. It had rained before I left for work, and I forgot to lock his doggy door. I watched him run around in the backyard like a puppy, knowing my furniture would be soaked once he came in. Back at work, I thought nothing more of it, but my curiosity got the best of me, and I'm glad it did. Looking back at my backyard camera, wanting to enjoy him frolicking around, I noticed Marlin was no longer leaping or chasing squirrels. He just stood there as if in a daze. Marlin's body began to shake violently, and then he started convulsing. It looked as if some invisible force was performing CPR on him. Something was coming out of him, though I couldn't tell if he was forcing it out or if it was forcing itself out. Then the tentacles began to latch onto the ground. Black balls spewed from his mouth, accompanied by a white liquid. The balls formed a fist-sized mound among the tentacles. As violently as the tentacles emerged, they retracted back in. Marlin just collapsed, and as I got up to run home, something caught my eye, and I sat back down. The black balls began to move, and the mound seemed to shake. Luminescent worms cracked out of their shells and started wriggling around my yard. They seemed to examine Marlin at first, wriggling over and around him. He didn't move or attack them. Then they started to spread throughout the yard. I jumped out of my seat and ran out of the office. By the time I got home, Marlin greeted me at the door like he normally did. The mound of balls was nowhere to be found, along with the worms in my backyard. Rushing to my office to rewatch the video, trying to see what happened while I was driving home, I was left with more questions than answers. The worms had just disappeared into the ground, the mound dissolving in the rain. No sign of a shell or husk. I went back outside to check for holes in the ground where I thought the worms had vanished. My lawn looked just as I'd left it. Marlin stood by my side, excited as usual, as if the worms hadn't come out of him. It wasn't until the third day that I noticed the change. Marlin couldn't seem to drink enough water. His water fountain was refilled 3 times that day, and the way he panted, I felt like he'd drink more if he could. Instead, he just lay around, moving from spot to spot. Now, I'm sure all of you have done the same thing I did. Googled the symptoms to figure out what was going on. If it were just a horseshoe worm, I'd have cured my beloved friend already. But this parasite is sentient and not of this world. It was the 4th night that convinced me and left me in such a paranoid state. Marlin's whimpering made me cave on something I'd never done before. I let him into my bed, figuring a good cuddle would fix him right up. In the middle of my sleep, I was slowly awoken by drops of water on my face. In my blur between wake and sleep, I didn't fully register what was happening. Marlin was standing over me, drooling profusely. From his mouth, tentacles stretched toward me. Coming to my senses as they reached about an inch from my face, I reacted without thinking, sending Marlin, all 120 pounds of him, crashing into my side table. I'd never gotten out of bed so fast, and found the light switch on the first attempt in my life. By the time the lights came on, I caught a glimpse of those tendrils retracting into Marlin's mouth. The way he turned and growled at me sent chills up my spine. I immediately reached over to my other nightstand and pulled out my gun, aiming it at Marlin. taking it off safety and cocking one in the chamber. It felt like I was in the wild against a savage beast. We were deadlocked, each of us waiting to see the other's reaction. Marlon's stance relaxed, and he lowered his head, turning away from me and walking out of the room. I only moved to keep the barrel of my .45 trained on him. Once he was out of sight, I clicked the safety back on and placed the gun on my nightstand. I got out of bed quickly and slammed my door shut. Finally, I could breathe a sigh of relief and try to comprehend what had just happened. It all felt surreal until I heard his footsteps outside the door. That snapped me back to the present, and once again, I was in my room, contemplating what to do. Marlon was outside my door, pacing back and forth. Prepare yourself. The horrors continue with a story that will haunt you long after it's told. Have you ever heard of the trolley problem? I currently work as a train station master, or rather assistant station master, even though I tend to do all the duties of both. ASM, as my name tag so helpfully proclaims to anyone with exceptional eyesight. However, working out the acronym in itself might take some time. Although a small station in North Wales, it's one that sees plenty of foot traffic due to the nearby mountains, especially Snowdon, the highest peak in Wales. On a typical day, you'd find me behind the booking desk, issuing tickets to the constant flow of tourists and hikers, or helpfully describing the best way to reach the summit of our beautiful mountain. It's a monotonous job, but it pays the bills, and I've grown fond of the routine over the years. I'd been eyeing the station master position for some time, eagerly waiting on the day old Gwyn would finally retire. But the old man has still got a spring to his step for a 70-year-old, so I think it'll still be some years yet. The day my life changed forever was supposed to be my day off. My wife Ruby and I had planned a trip to Anglesey to visit the South Stack Lighthouse, as I'd always had a love for these beacons of safety or danger on how you approach it. The evening before our trip, I was relaxing on the couch watching the telly, whilst Ruby was busying herself in the bedroom. "Hey babe, you all packed for tomorrow?" I shouted to her. Her voice drifted back from the other room, tinged with amusement. "Unlike you, Mr. Last Minute, I packed yesterday. We're only going for one night, remember, not embarking on a 6-month cruise." "I only wish," I chuckled as she came back in and plopped down beside me on the sofa. Promises, she said, rolling her eyes. "Just as soon as you get that promotion, right?" I turned to her, a mischievous glint in my eye. "Well, I can definitely promise you'll beg me to stop in less than a minute," before pouncing to tickle her mercilessly. "Stop!" she squealed, curling into a ball and swatting at me playfully. Our moment was interrupted by my phone ringing. I glanced at it over my shoulder, hesitating. "Leave it," Ruby urged, trying to pull me back, knowing where the seductive dance would lead. "But what if it's work?" She groaned, kicking herself away. "You and your bloody work." I reached for the phone, answering with a hint of guilt. "Hey, Gwyn." "Sorry it's late, Sam," Gwyn's voice crackled through the speaker. "I didn't mean to disturb you, but I'm afraid I had no choice. My son's been in an accident, and I need to get to Liverpool Medical Hospital ASAP. I need you to hold the fort tomorrow while I'm away." My heart sank, both for Gwyn and our ruined plans. "Jesus, I'm so sorry, Gwyn. Of course, I'll cover. Is your son okay?" "I'm sure he will be, old boy. He's a tough nut to crack. I know you had the day off, and I'm sorry to ask, as I'm sure you both had plans." "Not at all. Anything I can do to help. Please let me know how he is when you see him." After hanging up, I turned to Ruby, deflated. She instantly recognized my expression and moved to comfort me. "What's happened?" "It's Gwyn. His son's been in an accident. I need to cover tomorrow. I'm sorry, babe, but our trip will have to wait." Ruby hugged me tightly. "Oh, honey, that's okay. I understand, as long as his son's all right." The next morning, I woke after a restless night, leaving Ruby sleeping peacefully. As I went through my morning routine, I caught sight of my unpacked suitcase in the corner. "Every cloud," I muttered with a wry smile, at least saved from the chore of packing. The day at the station started like any other, albeit with the added responsibilities of Gwyn's absence. I surprised myself with how easily I took to the senior role, handling phone calls and coordinating staff. If anything, it was good experience for when I eventually took over permanently. As the clock ticked towards the end of my grueling 12-hour shift, I sent Ruby a quick text, promising to make up for our canceled plans with her favorite meal and a relaxing bath. The lack of response didn't worry me. She was probably busy with her own work. Just as I was about to leave, Kaylee, our young ticket booth collector, knocked on the office door. "Come in," I called. She entered, looking a bit nervous. Boss?" "It's Sam, Kaylee. We've worked together long enough now." She smiled sheepishly. "Right, sorry, Sam. I'm all cashed up for the night. Is it okay if I head out to catch the early bus?" "Of course. Have a safe trip home. See you tomorrow." No sooner had she left than the office phone rang. I recognized the central control number and suppressing a sigh before answering. "Sam speaking. How can I help?" "Hi, Sam. It's Steve from Control. We've got an issue on your line. Seems to be an obstruction on the southbound track just past the station. Probably just a broken branch. Any chance you can take a look? We'll have to delay any trains until it's sorted." I glanced at the clock, my frustration mounting. "It's just me left at the station now, Steve. The night master won't be in until 9 p.m. It'll be difficult to leave the station unattended." "Completely understand, Sam. Because of the obstruction, the last train has been delayed until 9:10 p.m. It should only take you a few minutes to check, as it looks like the error on the line is less than 10 meters from the station." Realizing I had no choice, I agreed. "All right, Steve. Give me 20 minutes, and I'll ring you back." "Thanks, Sam. It won't go unnoticed." I hung up, took a deep breath, and prepared for what I hoped would be my last task of the day. Donning my station jacket, I grabbed the heavy portable torch and my mobile phone. The station was eerily quiet as I left the office. With only one more train stopping tonight, I didn't expect many passengers this late on a Sunday evening. The emptiness felt oppressive as I walked along the platform and down the ramp towards the southbound tracks. Switching on the high beam of the torch, I watched as the darkness retreated before me, revealing the path of the train tracks ahead. I looked back one last time, half hoping to see someone enter the station, but was met with the same emptiness as before. "I guess it's just me, you, and this fucking branch then," I muttered to the tracks, trying to psych myself up for the task ahead. I'd walked only a few meters when my mobile rang. Not wanting to miss a call from Ruby, I fished it out of my pocket. The screen read, "Red," my nickname for my auburn-haired wife. I answered quickly. There she is, the love of my life. "Have you heard of the trolley problem?" a distorted male voice replied. My blood ran cold. "What? Who is this? Where's Ruby?" I said, "Have you heard of the trolley problem? Who the fuck is this? Why do you have my wife's phone?" "Answer the question, Samuel. I don't like repeating myself, let alone thrice. And the last thing you want is for your wife to die because you couldn't listen." My heart pounded in my chest as realization dawned. Okay, wait a second. Trolley problem. Yes, I've heard of it. It's the question about ethics and making the right choice. Sacrifice one to save many. Correct. And you lucky son of a bitch, are about to solve it. Wait, why? What have I done to you? I've got money, not much, but it's yours. Just please don't hurt my wife. The voice chuckled, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, Sammy, I'm not going to hurt anyone. I'm going to leave that all down to you." "What do you mean? Where's my wife, you bastard?" "Someone's got a potty mouth, hasn't he? Keep walking and you'll find your answer." The call ended, leaving me frozen in place, mouth agape as the torchlight danced in front of me. Apprehensively, I moved forward, terrified of what I might find. After several meters at the junction of the tracks, I caught movement in my peripheral vision to my left. I directed the torch beam towards the movement, and something glinted in the light. As I moved nearer, I realized it was coming from human eyes. I rushed forward to the body strapped across the train tracks, and instantly recognized the prone form of my beloved Ruby. She'd been tied to the tracks with chicken wire, blindfolded and gagged. I immediately set about trying to release her from her binds as she squirmed beneath me. I removed her blindfold and gag, revealing her terrified face. "Sam," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "Get me free, please." "I'm trying," I said, struggling with the restraints. My fingers were already bleeding from the sharp wire, leaving crimson smears on Ruby's clothes and skin. The mobile rang again, but I ignored it, focusing on freeing my wife. It rang again and again, each time heightening my panic. Suddenly, a message flashed across the screen. Answer the fucking phone or your wife will die in minutes. Shocked, I jumped when it rang once more. This time I answered. Finally, you listen. What are you? Shahit. Shut it, you're done talking. You listen to me now and that's it. No more talking. I will explain the situation and then you will make a decision. It's as simple as that. You can choose between your wife. My wife? Please, I choose my wife. You can take me. It's not that easy, Sammy. Interrupt me again, and I'll end you both right now. There was a pause, and as I didn't answer, he continued. Good. Right then, the aforementioned trolley problem. A train is coming and will arrive here in 3 minutes. So here lies the problem. You can ring control and say there is no obstruction and it's an error, or you can say it's still there and to switch the tracks. Switch the tracks, I cried out. Whoa, 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 sweet child of mine, Sammy, have you had a gander at the other tracks? My face went white. I drowned out Ruby's crying and screaming to pick up the torch and point it towards the same position on the other side of the tracks. In the torchlight, I saw 4, maybe 5 bodies all tied to the tracks. They were writhing in agony, trying to scream through their gags. The sight was horrifying. I could see exposed flesh where they'd struggled against their bindings, blood seeping from deep gashes. What is it? What's over there? Ruby cried as she saw me pointing my torch to the other track. I thought against telling her, but there was no point lying in our current predicament. I knelt beside her, frantically working at the wire while hurriedly explaining the situation. Save them, Sam, she pleaded. Save them. No, I love you. I don't know them. I love you too, baby, but it's the few for the many. You know it's the right choice. I'll always be with you. You've got 1 minute, Samuel, before I make the decision for you and contact control, the distorted voice sang from the mobile. I worked at the wire and finally got some traction. It was loosening. 30 seconds. Fine, I said as I grabbed the phone. Save the many, I sacrificed the few. Wow, I didn't think you'd make that decision, but okay, so let it be. Ring and let control know, and this whole thing can be over in a few minutes. I'm gonna find you and fucking kill you. Temper. I cut him off and rang control. Hi, Steve. It's Sam. I'm afraid you'll have to switch to the other track. There's one hell of a branch on the main track that's gonna need a forklift. Took your time, Steve laughed. Okay, no problem. I looked at my wife's pleading eyes as she mouthed the words don't. I shone my light over to the several people tied to the other line, wriggling around like bait worms on hooks. I looked at my feet before I spoke again. Scratch that, Steve. It's not as big as I thought. I'll lever it off now. Keep the original course. You sure, Sam? Yeah, no worries. Okay, train inbound in 4 minutes. I hung up and immediately it rang back. Congratulations, Samuel. You've made the selfless choice. Your wife will be proud. I threw the phone away as I went back to freeing her. Leave me, or you'll get hit, Ruby cried. I'm going nowhere without you. I cut my fingers up badly, but managed to free her arms, and we both worked on her legs. But the clock was ticking. In the distance, we heard the familiar toot-toot of the approaching train. Our speed increased as we helplessly worked at her feet bindings. In the distance, I heard the train arrive and stop at the station. Knowing that we weren't going to make it, Ruby grabbed me and looked me straight in the eyes. I love you, but you've got to go. Not yet. There's still time. Damn it, go. Go now. We heard the train's engine start up again, and it was now or never to pull off a miracle. The next minute seemed to slow down to an eternity. I managed to get one of Ruby's legs free and tried to hoist her back with my weight, hoping she'd break free, even if it took the skin from her leg. But the wire held, and the train passed in front of us, severing both her legs at the kneecaps as I pulled her away from the tracks. The sound was sickening. A wet crunch followed by Ruby's agonized screams. Arterial blood sprayed wildly, soaking us both as I desperately tried to stem the bleeding. The stench of iron filled the air, mixing with the acrid smell of the train's exhaust. Ruby immediately went into shock as I worked on tourniquets for both legs. My hands shook uncontrollably, slick with her blood. At that point, the phone rang. It was him. I answered and heard a taunting, reminiscent of the Jurassic Park screensaver scene. I said you choose one, Samuel, not have your cake and eat it, so now this is happening. I heard the clunk of the track change, and watched in horror as the main track diverted to the sub-track. "No!" I screamed before realizing that was the last passenger train. "You fucked up," I shouted into the phone. "There are no more trains till 6 a.m., and I'll have the track closed by then." I started laughing hysterically. "True, but it seems you've forgotten about the coal train that doesn't stop." My eyes went wide as I heard the steam pipe of the approaching coal train, knowing it was less than a minute away. There was nothing I could do. I focused on securing my wife's leg ties as the nightly coal train barreled through, ending several lives I could have saved, people I'd never met, a mistake I'd never forget. The sounds were horrific. Screams quickly turned to wet gurgles, bones crunched, flesh tore. When it passed, the tracks were littered with mangled flesh and pulverized bones, 2 of which had been children that had been decapitated due to the small stature. The stench of blood and viscera was overwhelming. I vomited violently, unable to process the carnage before me. In the days that followed, I was questioned relentlessly by the police. The media dubbed it the trolley tragedy, and my name was dragged through the mud. How could I have let this happen? Why didn't I alert authorities sooner? Ruby survived initially but got sepsis, then gangrene, which finally took her life 3 months later. Her last words to me were, "It's not your fault." But how could I believe that? I quit my job shortly after and am currently drinking myself to death, trying to work out what I could have done differently. The nightmares are relentless. I see the victims as vengeful spirits, accusing me of their deaths. I can't scrub the feeling of sticky warmth from under my fingernails, no matter how hard I try. The caller was never caught, but sometimes I receive unmarked packages on the anniversary on the incident. The worst one was a severed foot from one of the victims that he must have bagged before the bodies were taken away. A demented trophy of that horrific night. Why must the killer still torment me with my decision? Clearly, my psychological torture has only just begun, and I'm left questioning if I made the right choice, knowing that either way, I'll never escape the guilt of the lives lost that night. Did I do the right thing? What would you have done? As one nightmare fades, another begins. Let's dive into a darker, more twisted story. Cursed illusion. Here I was, sitting in the bus, once full of people, now full of my imagination. I was staring out of the window and just thinking how things had changed and how I had come here. Once my imagination had been helping me, and now it had come alive and had started forming things. On every seat of the bus, there was this same girl. Short hair, Asian eyes, in a school dress, and with sharp teeth. She and her all shadows, which were sitting on all the seats, were just groaning and making other scary sounds. I was stuck between them. I was trying to ignore them. I started looking out of the window to avoid any eye contact with any of those entities. Suddenly, I heard some metallic sound coming from above. I looked up. An Asian girl was on the ceiling upside down. She came crawling to me, making all the metallic sound and making scary faces. It all started when I was out of curiosity trying to do some experiments. I was in my hostel with my roommate, sitting on the other side of the room. "After the exam, it's all boring, Yar," he said. "Well, yes, nothing to study, nothing to prepare for. What to do now?" "Shall we watch some movie?" He gave an idea. "Yes, that's right. What movie should we watch? Something horror? Well, someone want to try to taste the fear? Yeah, let's try. Are you sure? I like horror movies, but you, my friend, are faint-hearted." "I will be fine." We started watching a horror movie. There were many gruesome scenes. I saw my roommate. He was closing his eyes in most of the parts of the movie. In the movie, they made some scenes where the actors were performing some rituals. I got interested in those scenes, and after the movie, I tried to know about them all. Sitting in the dark, using candles, using salt, all these were common in all the rituals. I tried to perform the ritual, which can make someone hallucinate for some period of time. I gathered all the resources except the target's DNA. I didn't know whom to target. I walked in the corridor in search of something which can make me perform the ritual. I spent hours searching, and at last I found hair near the window. I collected the hair and returned to my room. I waited for my roommate to leave the room so that I can perform the ritual, for some light fun only. He left the room to meet someone. I turned off the lights and sat on the floor, made the circle, triangles inside, and some sigils in them. Started chanting the mantras and waited for something to happen. Nothing happened. My door suddenly burst open. My roommate came in. He was shocked to see me like this, sitting in the circle surrounded by candles. "What are you doing?" he asked with his eyes wide open. "I was trying a ritual we saw in the movie." "And what ritual is this? Summoning devil? Mind control? Controlling something?" "Well, just giving hallucination to the target." "And who is your target? Me?" "Ah, no yar. Just some random person whose hair I found outside." "Outside? You just collected someone's hair and started doing this?" I know it is not correct, but this was just a random try. I knew this is just some prank stuff. This ritual doesn't exist in the real world." "Are you sure that it is not real witchcraft?" "I mean, yeah, do you think I can hallucinate someone just by sitting in the circle? Kuch biyar." "You know how witchcrafts work. There is some involvement of demons in them. The demons are being brought from hell to perform some activity that the person has been asking." "How do you know?" "I have not completed my sentence. So when you sat in the circle, lit up the candle, and started saying, 'Lunch kom sel nitab fam geta doyan,' you basically asked a demon to enter the world and do your play." "Okay, but this is not a real spell, nah, so I guess it's fine." "Are you sure?" "What do you mean? Are you sure that your spell didn't work?" "I don't think so." "Whose hair was that?" "I don't know. I found it in the corridor." "It was yours, Vidwan. My hair?" "Yes. So, you are saying that I did this spell on me, but I am not hallucinating. Are you sure? See the time, Vidwan. Do I ever come this early from dinner?" I checked the time. It was just 15 minutes after he left for dinner. He usually takes around 45 minutes to return. This time, he came too early. I turned towards him. He wasn't there. The door was locked too. Did I see a dream? I was confused. I erased the circle and all the symbols. I sat on my bed and started searching more about this spell and the sigils. It took me a few moments to realize that the spells and the sigils were real and not just something made for fun. The sigil of Morpheus was not just something one should use for fun. I started having a headache. I unlocked the door to let my roommate in and tried to sleep. I opened my eyes. It was dark here. The lights were off. I used my mobile flashlight and saw my roommate in his bed, sleeping peacefully. I went out of the room for some fresh air. I sat near a window. I realized that the window was the same where I found the hair for the ritual. The breeze was cooling my face and the starry night was making my mood better. I sat and was thinking how beautiful our nature is. Trees all green and full of fruits, flowers fully bloomed, and sweet scent in the air. I was enjoying the calmness. Someone tapped on my shoulder. "Abaya Kara." A friend from the other room came to me. "What are you doing?" "Just enjoying the nature. Happy breeze, green trees, starry night, and other things." "Nature? Why did you come in half asleep, buddy? Our hostel is in the better city. There are no trees, no fresh air, no starry night. The whole area is polluted with carbon monoxide. Go in your room and sleep." He left me there. I looked out of the window. The starry night, trees, breeze, all were gone. Concrete forest, CO in the air, and polluted clouds were in the sky. I might be dreaming again. I should go back to sleep. I thought, yes, you should. A voice echoed, in my head or in the whole corridor, I didn't know. "Who is there?" There was silence. No one replied. No one was visible. Was I hallucinating? Maybe not. Maybe it was just because of my sleepy head. I went in my room and slept. The next day, early in the morning, there was a lot of noise coming from the corridor. I went to check. Many of the students were leaving the hostel to visit their home for vacation. I was not allowed to visit home because of some reasons. I planned to study next semester's syllabus in the vacation time. Very few of us were left in the hostel. We planned to stay till late at night and talk about a few things. There was a guy who was too sad as his roommate left and he felt alone. Our Surya Bai, he left today morning, nah? Why to miss him right now? It's not even 11 a.m. here. At what time did he leave? I didn't meet him. I sat near Surya. His room is just in front of mine. Today? Dude, he left like 5 days ago, just after our exam, and from then I'm alone. That's why I'm feeling lonely. 5 days ago? But I met him yesterday. He came to me while I was sitting at... I realized that all I saw was just some kind of dream. Hein? Never mind, let's meet at night. Saying this, I left his room and came in mine. What all have I been dreaming? What is happening? Day. My roommate looked at me with his small eyes. He was still sleeping. Why are you crying? There is something wrong going on. I have been seeing things. I tried to explain. Take this Charan, this helps in sleep. And he dozed off. Charan? He didn't even listen to what I am going through. Well, there should be some reversible spells too. I should search. I started browsing and went on searching for hours. And at last, I came to the conclusion that the magic I did is irreversible. I closed my laptop and sat in shock. I was regretting performing that spell, magic without knowing the side effects. I was regretting for performing the magic using my hair unknowingly. There must be a way to stop this. There must be a point where all this stops. I should search for that. But I have already gone searching for hours. Where to check now? Shall I try to check the movie again? I opened Google and checked the whole script of the movie. Why waste 3 hours again when one could just go through the script? There were many stupid jokes, many hoaxes, and finally found the spell portion. The movie climax was that the person who was the target of magic died because of hallucination. So this is how things gonna end. Yes, a sound echoed. My door started banging. Who's there? I asked. It's me, dude. Open the door. It was my roommate's voice. I turned toward his bed. It was empty. The room light started flickering. I figured that I was in trouble. I looked here and there to check if his duplicate is still in the room. There was no one. I got off the bed to open the door. I heard a giggle. It was coming from my room. I wasn't able to get the direction it was coming from. I looked up. Just above my bed on the ceiling, he was hanging on the wall with a wide smile on his face. His eyes were shining because of the bulb light. But it seemed that his pupils are pure white and he is some kind of evil. The banging on the door became louder, and some more sounds started coming from the other side of the door. It was not him anymore. There was something that had him. I started praying. I closed my eyes and waited for some miracles to happen. Nothing happened. All the sounds continued. I stayed at my place and waited for the end. There was no ending. These sounds went on continuing. More sounds started appearing, scratching on walls, whispering, and many more. I gathered all my courage and opened my eyes. It was all quiet. No strange figure, no sound, nothing. My roommate was sleeping on his bed. I sat on my bed. I was all sweaty. I tried to sleep. The next morning, I started seeing strange figures more frequently. Started feeling someone sitting over my shoulder. Or bye. Want to watch some movies? My roommate asked. Sure. This time you choose a movie. I replied. I was relieved that I'm going to get distracted by watching something light. My roommate won't ever choose any horror movie. He is scared of them. So what movie we gonna watch? I asked. It's a new horror movie. Horror? Yes, you love those na. And also, you have been disturbed for a few days, so I thought that this might help you. I don't think it will be a good idea. Don't worry, I'm not gonna get scared this time. I am ready for it. We started watching the movie. It was about a girl who went on a picnic with his class. Her bus fell into a pit and they all died. Her ghost came back to the world to take revenge on the people who killed her by altering the braking system of her bus. Movie was good. What do you say? My roommate asked. I was looking up. My eyes were filled with tears. I could see the same girl on my ceiling. She was smiling at me. Her eyes were red because of the blood and her face was pale blue. She came down crawling on the wall. She came on the floor and started dancing. Her moves were scary. She was repeating the same steps again and again. It seemed her bones were all broken. Bone-knuckling sound was coming again and again. I grabbed my roommate's hand. Bye, Chal. We shouldn't stay here any longer. We should run, I said. Why? What happened? This girl will kill us. Girl? She is dancing here. She gonna kill us. But there is no one in this room. You should sleep now. I guess you are tired. No. I fell on my knees. I was so scared that I couldn't gather my senses and know that all this was some hallucination. I thought I'm gonna die. My roommate ran to ask for help from wardens. All came to me. I was sitting on the floor. I had a weird smile on my face. Eyes were full of tears, and I was saying something. They didn't tell me what exactly I was saying, but they sent me to the pandit. The pandit asked for all the problems I have. My roommate told him everything. I was still in shock. The pandit did some hawan and asked my roommate to do a few things that he followed properly. I was left with the pundit. He wanted me to stay till I recover, whatever I was going with. I opened my eyes. I was tied to the chair. A few people were in front of me. What is your name? Vidwan. Are you sure? Yes. Can you see that girl here? I looked everywhere. No. What's going on? Why am I tied? And where am I? You were sent here by your college. They said you are suffering from some kind of possession. They say you see things. Yes, I do. Well, you won't anymore. The spell has lost its effect on you. We did our work. Now you are free to go. I left the room. My roommate was there waiting for me. I came near him and hugged him. You saved me, brother. I had to. Now, shall we go back? Yes, sure. We have to take the bus. We went to the bus stop and waited for the bus to arrive. We sat on the seats in the bus. I was happy that I am well and nothing bad gonna happen to me now. I was looking outside and was enjoying the view. Between. What girl did you see? My roommate asked. The same girl from the movie. That Asian one? Yes. Did she look like this? He pointed towards the girl sitting next to us. She was the exact same girl. I realized that all the passengers in the bus have turned into the same girl. Hey, what happened? My roommate asked. She is here. Saying, I turned towards him. He was staring at me. Oh, the girl. The Asian girl from the movie. Which girl? Which movie? Dude, what are you talking about? We watched a movie just yesterday. How can you forget? Movie? Yesterday? You have been unconscious for the last 1 week. It was the bus accident. You were coming back from a date, and your bus fell into a pit, and all died except you. You were in the hospital since then. What are you saying about the movie? Have we watched any movie where there were some spells were shown? Yes, that we did. 2 weeks ago, I think, and then you tried one of them. Which one did I do? I have no idea. I was out of the room when you did all this. When I came back, you were asleep, and there were circles on the floor. I realized what you did and erased everything. I looked at the window again. I started taking deep breaths. I realized the mistake I did. I turned towards the girl again. She slowly turned towards me. Her pale blue face had a very weird smile on it, and her eyes were looking at me. All the other passengers turned into the same girl. Short hair, Asian eyes, in a school dress, and with sharp teeth. She and her all shadows, which were sitting on all the seats, were just groaning and making other scary sounds. I was stuck between them. I was trying to ignore them. I started looking out of the window to avoid any eye contact with any of those entities. Suddenly, I heard some metallic sound coming from above. I looked up. An Asian girl was on the ceiling upside down. She came crawling to me, making all the metallic sound and making scary faces. She came closer to me and hissed. It was all the hallucination, but I got scared. Things like this started happening again. There was no way out, I figured. I got a lot scared and tried to jump out of the window. I was grabbed by the other passengers. I released myself from their grip and ran to the driver to ask him to stop. But I saw the girl running behind me to kill me. I ran faster and fell on the driver. Our bus took several turns and fell. All of us were injured. An ambulance came. We all were admitted to the hospital. We got discharged. My parents came to take me home. I knew she was waiting for me there too. I just sat silently in the car and was ready for everything. You may think the worst is over, but the next story will prove you wrong. Friends are to be counted on. Friends aren't to be trusted as well. I'm not sure how this is going to be perceived, but it is extremely vital that I get the word out to someone. So far, no one has listened to me. No cops, no DAs, no therapists, no psychiatrist, absolutely no one. I need someone to believe me. I am not losing my mind. I had a friend group consisting of 5 guys. Big Tom, Daryl, Robbie, Lawrence, and Gil, with myself making up the 6th of the group. All of us had been friends since high school and hung out through college. It was known even in high school and more in college that even though all of us were a group, Lawrence and Gil were best friends first. If a party was on the agenda for the night, they always arrived together and left together. Both went to the same college, majored in computer science, and both graduated top of the class. Having 2 friends like that led to so many jokes about sexuality or dependence, but within the group, it was normal. Kind of like having twins as friends, I always thought. Hell, they even looked alike, both being small, nerdy types. Cut to us at 26, and we all lived in the same city, Chicago. Tom and I had a house all to ourselves out in the suburbs, which was where the incident took place. We had a once-a-month poker night that all of us showed up to religiously. Big Tom and I held the poker night in the basement, which was decorated like you would expect college graduates without prospective dating partners would decorate the house like. It was an open-concept basement with just one length of a wall being taken up by the bathroom and the laundry room. We had posters along the walls, along with Tom's trophies. He had many, and they were large. Seeing as he used to be a top wrestling prospect at university until he messed up his shoulder. Tom had always been big, but after the shoulder injury, he had ballooned up to 350 pounds, giving the nickname Big Tom some serious truth behind it. Daryl and Robbie showed up around 9 that night. Poker night didn't start until 10, but Robbie never turned down a beer, and Daryl liked having a buddy to ride with on the metro. We were casually waiting around the table when Robbie started talking about Lawrence and Gil. What do you think they got up to in Thailand? Just some fun times or something better? Like he said as he killed his beer with a wink. Come on, man, don't be like that. They went to look at some temples or something. Don't be rude about it, Tom said, giving Robbie his patented look of disdain. I'm just saying, man, those two have been getting weirder and weirder. I caught lunch with them in the city before the trip and they were super excited. Like kids on Christmas morning excited. And 2 days ago, I saw them on Lower Wacker at night, just walking among the slums. No smiles, no expressions. I honked my horn and flipped the bird out the window, and they just stared like I was a stranger. Now, tell me that ain't some weird shit, Robbie said. It was a bit strange, because even though Lawrence and Gil were tight, they were always friendly and quick to say hello. And it wouldn't be like they missed seeing Robbie. He was the only asshat in Chicago to drive a bright blue, jacked-up Jeep. It stood out, making it easy to spot him randomly out and about the city. Yeah, well, who knows, man? Maybe you pissed them off recently. Did you do anything extremely dickheaded to them lately? I asked, knowing just how easy it was to be pissed at Robbie. He had a way of getting under your skin, but was good about recognizing when he goes too far. That's just it. I haven't done anything. I've practically been a choir boy, Robbie said excitedly, sensing I was grasping his meaning with our two friends. We then heard the garage door open, something that was not shocking as we had given each of our friends the passcode, allowing them to come in whenever they wanted. Well, I think they just arrived, so drop it. We'll see how the night goes, and if it's still weird at the end of it, we'll say something as a group. Fair? Daryl proposed, quickly agreed upon by Tom and myself. Just then we heard the door to the basement open, and down came Lawrence and Gil, both looking stone-faced and stiff with their movements. Boys, about time. Let's do this, Big Tom shouted as we made our way around the poker table. Lawrence and Gil looked at each other and then sat down across from each other. The other four of us just stared in amazement. They never sat apart from one another. They had always sat next to each other, Gil on the right and Lawrence on the left. Robbie gave me a wide-eyed face and motioned with his eyes at the pair, in a, "Are you seeing this shit?" kind of way. I sat down with the others, not exactly ignoring Robbie, but not giving in to his skepticism just yet. Daryl grabbed the cards and started shuffling as Tom pulled out the chips from under the table and started dividing them up between us. We played as normal, but there were problems with Gil and Lawrence, like the way they were placing bets or the fact that they never once cracked a smile or a joke during the time we played. They would never increase a bet, but always called one, regardless of if they had a good hand or not. They didn't drink anything either. No beer, no water, no sodas, nothing. It wasn't making any sense. And then there were their eyes. I would catch them staring, leering at us as the night wore on. Gil was staring at me and Tom, while Lawrence's eyes lingered on Daryl and Robbie. Robbie finally stood and said he was going for a smoke, gesturing upstairs and looking at me. "Yeah, I'll burn one," I said, heading towards the stairs with him. "I'm going to use the toilet," Lawrence said suddenly, standing up and looking at Gil with such an intense stare. "I'll stay here," Gil said, peering down at Lawrence intently. "Are you two hooking up or something? Jesus, you two are so weird tonight." Robbie said as we went upstairs. I didn't even have it in me to tell him off for making fun of them, because I was getting a bit weirded out by them as well. Outside the garage, Robbie had already lit a cigarette and passed me the butt. He took a deep drag and sighed. Dude, we have to say something. This is beyond weird, man. Yeah, I know. I keep getting the feeling that they are staring at us, like they are watching our moves or something, I said, exhaling smoke and looking at the stars. I was trying to keep my cool and not let Robbie make me even more nervous. Dude, exactly. Lawrence is looking at me like I'm a steak man. Did you see how his eyes are dark, like the eye itself and the skin around it? It's giving me the creeps. I don't like this. I know Daryl and Tom are going to try and keep it civil and chill, but we have to find out what's going on. That means getting a bit tough with them and getting them to tell us the truth about what has changed them so much, Robbie said, almost pleading with me. He flicked his butt into my yard, drawing a stern gaze from me. But he was right. This was beyond normal for Lawrence and Gil, and we needed to say something to get them back to normal. Okay, you're right. Let's go down and... Bam. We looked at each other. It sounded like a truck had crashed in my house. Bam. Bam. 2 more crashes. I could then tell it was from my basement. What the hell? Robbie said, pushing past me, and as he ran towards the door. I was right on his heels. He led the way through the house to the basement stairs, taking them in leaps. We landed at the bottom of the stairs and came upon the scene of a horror movie. Gil was atop Tom's back, with both of them turned away from us. It looked like Gil was trying to choke out Tom, which was a ridiculous assumption, considering Tom was twice his size and had years of training on his side. The basement was littered with the broken table and chairs, trophies strewn among the floor with the walls smashed in. Slowly, the 2 turned around and we could see the true savagery that was taking place. Gil had a knife and was plunging it into Tom's chest and neck. Blood was flowing down Tom's shirt, almost pouring down the floor. Tom had a glazed look in his eyes and was making hand gestures towards us, like grabbing towards us or motioning us to go away. Tom's legs gave out, with him dropping to his knees. It was then that I looked at Gil. Gil was grinning from ear to ear, breathing heavily but still able to laugh in a wheezing manner. It was as if he was getting joy out of murdering one of his closest friends. It was a sound that would have been unsettling even without the look on his face and the knife he was plunging into his friend's body. I then saw his eyes, pure black, with black veins surrounding them. His gaze was focused clearly on Tom's, and I could hear him say words to Tom. Una magis anima pro domino. Una magis anima pro domino. Una magis. Gil kept repeating the words until Tom fell face first onto the floor. Robbie and I hadn't moved. We were frozen in terror as we saw a friend murder another friend. I couldn't make my legs move, nor could I seem to take a breath. I broke through the fear when I heard Robbie cry, "What's happening?" "Tom!" I screamed as I ran towards Tom's body, as adrenaline pumped through me now. Gil looked up from Tom's back, still smiling, tilting his head to one side. "One more for the master," he whispered before launching himself at me from the floor. I saw the knife in his hand but could do nothing to stop it, as he quickly closed the space between us and plunged the knife into the side of my knee. I screamed in pain and collapsed on the ruined leg. When I collapsed, I fell on the knife, trapping it between my body and the floor. Gil was tugging at the handle, causing pain to keep shooting up my leg with each pull, causing my scream to falter and crack as my body started to sputter. My heart was beating out of my chest and I was losing my ability to breathe. Pain was controlling me, but fear was heightening the pain to the max. I had never seen my own blood come out like that, in such a spurting manner. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" I screamed, hyperventilating as I looked at Gil and his smile. "I don't want to die," I began to repeat in my head over and over. The pain and fear caused the thought to go faster in my mind as I watched Gil wrench at the knife. I was looking around wildly as Gil finally gave up on the knife and grabbed something off the floor. Robbie jumped over me, then and tackled Gil to the floor. Robbie burst up and immediately started kicking Gil. I tried to crawl away from the carnage, scared for my life, yet still watching over my shoulder as Robbie attacked Gil. Robbie looked to be getting the upper hand when the door to the bathroom burst open. I turned forward and saw Lawrence standing there. With a knife in his hand, blood dripped from the blade onto the floor. I looked at his face and saw the same black eyes and black starburst veins leading from his eyes into his cheeks and forehead. He began to make his way towards Robbie and Gil. He walked past me, his target being Robbie alone. I fought through the fear and made my move. I rolled over and grabbed a hold of Lawrence's leg, yelling to Robbie, "Robbie, run now!" Lawrence slashed down with his knife, and I reached up with my left arm to protect my face. Lawrence slashed my arm, and I felt another flare of pain. Lawrence reared back to slash again, and I found a reserve of energy and pushed up with all my might to tip Lawrence backwards and off balance. He went down hard, falling on the arm without the knife. There was a loud crack as Lawrence landed. The knife he had previously been holding flew across the floor, into the debris caused by the fight between Tom and Gil. I thought he would be done for, so I didn't expect Lawrence's foot to connect with my chin. I had a sense of shock, and then the lights went out. I came to, slowly rising up, seeing Lawrence and Gil towering over a now beaten-down Robbie. It looked like Robbie had given them all he had, but the two close friends seemed to feel no pain. Lawrence's left hand was dripping blood, and I noticed the bone was sticking out of the forearm. That was his only injury, as I looked over at Gil and saw that Robbie had tuned him up good. One eye was almost completely swollen shut, and blood was dripping down off his chin at a steady rate from multiple facial wounds. But regardless of their wounds, both men were standing still and stared down at the prone, yet still alive Robbie. They began to chant, the same line that Gil had said before taking down Tom. Una magis anima pro domino. Una magis anima pro domino. Una magis anima pro domino. They were shouting. I saw that both now held some of Tom's large wrestling trophies in hand. I could sense the moment coming to a head and knew that Robbie would be on the receiving end of that moment. Robbie then came to life, and he kicked up with his leg at Gil, trying to knock him down. But Robbie had been beaten too badly, and his strength was too far gone. Lawrence and Gil then both looked at each other and smiled. They raised their makeshift weapons, and I turned my head before I could see another friend perish under their blows. I covered my ears and waited for the screaming to stop, followed by the thuds. When I opened my eyes and uncovered my ears, my two former friends were now standing above me. Both sets of eyes were blacker than before, the veins of black spreading further into their faces. Whatever they were doing, it seemed to be consuming their very faces. "Our master requires payment," Gil said, tilting his head from side to side. He was studying me, I realized, like a scientist would when they study a worm in the ground. I could feel hatred and evilness emit from his face. There was also an alien feeling, like something from out of this world was trying to break free from the blackness that was his eyes. "We are close to glory. You are close to glory. You shall witness his rise even after you fall," Lawrence whispered. "We are close now. 3 more payments and the master shall grace us." I waited as they began their chant again, knowing I would only have a few seconds to do what I needed to do. I had to time it right. There would only be one chance. Fear had me in its grip, but I had to overcome it. They looked down as they spoke, smiles so large that it cracked their faces in half. "Una magis anima pro domino, una magis anima pro domino," they chanted, raising the trophies in the air again. Their eyes, black pits now, with no distinction between the skin and eye. Their faces were sucking in all light in the world, drinking in my fear and my soul itself. "Stop! Just stop!" I yelled as I reached both hands up to fend off the coming blows. I knew this was the end, but my body was still fighting on. I grabbed Gil's weapon as it came down. I had hope for just a second, until I heard Lawrence's grunt behind me. I don't remember what happened after that, because Lawrence brought his trophy down on my head. 1, 2, 3 times he struck. And again, I lost consciousness. A cop explained the next moments to me when I was fully conscious again and could answer questions. That was a week after the incident, seeing as I was in a coma for a while. A neighbor had heard the commotion, since Robbie and I had failed to shut the garage door or the door leading to the basement. The screams scared the neighbors so much, they had called the police. Right when Lawrence brought the trophy down on my head for the 3rd time, The cops burst downstairs with tasers and guns drawn and took down both Lawrence and Gil. Lawrence was on the receiving end of the guns, and they had done too much damage for the paramedics to save him. Lawrence's final moments consisted of him laughing and chanting, that same line being repeated over and over, Una magis anima pro domino. Gil, though, lived, as he was the lucky one to catch the prongs from the tasers. He was taken to jail immediately after being fixed up at the hospital, although I heard he was telling a different version of what I had of the night. The police found Daryl in the bathroom, in the tub to be exact. They believe that Lawrence had lured him in somehow before doing the deed. I think that Lawrence and Gil had chosen between us who would be whose victim, which is why they attacked us at different intervals. I found out later in the hospital and from the subsequent criminal investigation what had happened to cause them to become murderous beings. Lawrence and Gil had made it to Thailand, but witnesses had seen them get into a car with 3 Englishmen, dressed all fancy apparently, the first night in Bangkok. The next time any CCTV or witnesses caught any sight of the friends were when they were dropped off at the airport by the same car. They left all their luggage at the hotel along with all their money. They had 13 days of unaccounted for time. The authorities believe that this is all unrelated. I have pleaded with them to take it seriously and to investigate it, but they ignore me. I have tried telling my doctors or anyone who comes to see me that there is something more to this situation than men going crazy. The cops had searched their apartments, finding that Gil had actually been staying at Lawrence's place since their return. The walls were covered in Latin, with phrases mentioning a master and the payments that were required. It was discovered the chant that Gil and Lawrence were saying, Una magis anima pro domino, was in fact one more soul for the master. The police also found out that the two had taken to walking the streets of Chicago at night, but haven't investigated that matter any further. The cops and detectives all believe that Gil and Lawrence were lovers, whose strain of hiding their relationship caused Lawrence to snap and force Gil into the crimes. That murdering us friends was the only way to keep their relationship a secret. The police refuse to investigate any unsolved murders and tell me that Lawrence had just gone crazy, and while Gil was complicit in the crimes, he was a victim just as well. Gil had apparently admitted all this, crying and breaking down how he did not want to hurt anyone. It was all Lawrence. Gil claimed that he was actually trying to protect me after Lawrence had attacked the others. He was trying to hit Lawrence with a trophy, not me. Gil claims that Lawrence had committed all the murders and that he was the master. The police seem to believe him because I heard that he is only being charged with battery and kidnapping. It's all a lie, or the authorities are just grasping at straws. They were not lovers, nor did they go crazy. Gil was just as guilty as Lawrence for those atrocities. There was something different about them that night. Gil's eyes are apparently normal now because the police believed I was hallucinating and misremembering facts due to the head trauma. When I explained the blackness and the spreading evil in the veins, they said that Gil said I would be saying that I had been screaming about blackness and eyes while Lawrence attacked me. I sit here in the hospital, assured by the police that Gil is in jail and is not intent on harming me. That is a lie. I have been here at the hospital for 14 days, dealing with brain swelling and some terrible damage to my knee. While I was told I'd never walk without a limp and had a chance of continued symptoms from the brain damage, it was not injuries that caused me to begin to worry. I have begun to notice things. Certain hospital staff members have a darkness about their eyes. I feel myself staring at the orderlies who watch me too much as they enter the room and listening to the door after the RNs leave the room, whispering to themselves. Doctors say this is the brain swelling causing me to hallucinate. The police believe that my injuries are to blame for my beliefs as well. I swear I can hear Una magis anima pro domino, or one more for the master, if I listen closely at night. My family thinks the blows to my head have caused me to become unhinged, seeing danger at every turn. But I know the staff are listening to me and staring at me, but they make no move against me. Gil is in jail, but I don't think he will stay there. The news has kept the whole situation on the down low. Nothing has been mentioned on any of the major networks or newspapers, nor have any of the tabloids mentioned the incident. I think I can make it out the window and onto the ground without anyone seeing me, if I have to make a move. I still have one good leg, and could make it to at least somewhere with a car and get out of town. The police are in on the lie as well. At least the ones I have been talking to are. They say I am not allowed to leave the hospital at all for my own safety. It's all a lie, that I know. I can make a run, but I don't know how long. I may have a brain injury. I know that, but I am not crazy. I know what I saw and what actually happened that night. I know the truth. I have to go now. I hear a commotion down the hall. It sounds like someone singing, or maybe chanting, Una magis anima pro domino. That is all I hear now. One more for the master.